Good morning and welcome to the 15th meeting of the Rural Economy and Connectivity Committee. The only item today on our agenda is a Stage 2 consideration of the Agriculture Retained EU Law and Data Scotland Bill. I'd like to welcome the Cabinet Secretary for the Rural Economy and Tourism. Now, we have lots to get through this morning, but it will work well if we take this slowly and steadily. And I'm going to explain briefly the procedure for anyone watching. There will be one debate on each group of amendments. I will call the member who lodged the first amendment in that group to speak to and move that amendment, and to speak to all the other amendments in that group. Then I will call any other members who have lodged amendments in that group. Members who have not lodged amendments in that group but wish to speak should make a request to speak, and please only speak when I call you in. If he has not spoken in the group, I will then invite the Cabinet Secretary to contribute to the debate. The debate on the group will be concluded by me inviting the member who moved the first amendment in the group to wind up. Following the debate on each group, I will check whether the member who moved the first amendment in the group wishes to press it to a vote or to withdraw. If they wish to press ahead, I will put the question on that amendment. If a member wishes to withdraw their amendment after it has been moved, they must seek the agreement of other members to do so. If any member present objects, the committee immediately moves to a vote on that amendment. If any member does not want to move their amendment when called, they should say, "Not moved." Please note that any other member present may move such an amendment. If no one moves the amendment, I will immediately call the next amendment on the marshalled list. I remind you that only committee members are allowed to vote, and voting will take place electronically. The committee is required to indicate formally that it has considered and agreed each section of the bill. So I will put the appropriate question at the appropriate point when that happens. And I'm now going to move on to stage 2. So, moving to the list in front of us. The first question is that section 1 be agreed. Are we all agreed? If you do not agree, please indicate in the chat room with a D. We are agreed. And therefore, I'm now going to call Amendment 36 in the name of Colin Smyth, grouped with Amendments 37 and 24. Colin Smyth, please can you move Amendment 36 and speak to all amendments in the group?
Thank you, Convener. Amendment 36 in my name, which I am happy to move. Like all amendments in this group, seeks to introduce a set of guiding principles for the secondary legislation introduced through the enabling powers in this bill. This is intended to act as a purpose clause in line with the committee's clear stage 1 recommendation, and it has two aims. Firstly, to provide some limitations on the extremely broad regulation making powers this bill introduces, and secondly, to clarify our policy priorities. Between now and 2024, we must develop an entirely new agricultural support system. It's essential that this transition period is used to help lay the groundwork for this, for example, through pilot. However, the bill as it stands provides no sense of policy direction for that work or the types of areas the pilot should focus on. The amendment includes a range of objectives, which I hope will act as a guide during this period without acting as a barrier to necessary changes. The objectives listed in my amendment are loosely based around the remit of the Farming and Food Production Future Policy Group in order to ensure the policy pursued transition period is consistent with the future direction of any new system. These are fairly broad categories which should be able to underpin a range of changes. On top of these more general categories, I've included a few specific priorities such as carbon reduction, working conditions and food security. I've included a clause clarifying that none of these objectives should be achieved at the expense of another. I think this is an important point. For example, we should not be pursuing policies which may improve productivity but which undermine carbon reduction, or indeed vice versa. Finding policies with minimum negative consequences is vital to the success of our next system, and we must start developing these solutions now. The other two amendments in this group similarly look to set out guiding principles to inform secondary legislation made under this bill. The wording of all three amendments in this group reveals fairly broad agreement on the way forward, as does the fact that three different parties have proposed a purpose clause. Amendment 24 by John Finnie goes into a little more detail on what the objective should be, raising a wide range of very important issues. This amendment would provide a clear and ambitious direction of travel moving forward, which I support. Conversely, Amendment 37 by Rachel Hamilton is drafted more broadly, giving ministers more flexibility while still providing greater clarity on the purpose of this transition period and our longer-term ambitions for the agriculture sector. As with mine, it appears to be informed by the future policy group's remit. I believe my amendment incorporates elements of both of these approaches from John Finnie and Rachel Hamilton, with some specific aims and some more general categories. However, all three amendments make a worthwhile contribution, and I would be happy to support any of them at this stage as a starting point in the debate on how we can deliver the overarching purpose and direction the committee and many stakeholders highlighted the need for during stage one. If any of these amendments are passed, specific gaps or technical issues can be addressed at stage 3, in particular if the government acknowledges the strong support for a purpose clause and commits to working with all parties to seek to achieve consensus on any final wording. Thank you.
Thank you, Colin. I'd now like to call Rachel Hamilton to speak to Amendment 37 and any other amendments in the group. Rachel.
Thank you, Convener. My Amendment 37 has similar objectives to that of Colin Smyth, but has a clear difference. Under the principles of secondary legislation, the committee will note that my list is shorter. My list is comprehensive, and that is because, having engaged with stakeholders extensively, I believe we need a focused approach to what the regulations should contribute to the principle. One example would be delivering for rural communities in Colin Smyth's amendment. Whilst I understand the basis and completely agree with his premise, I have concerns that it is too vague and possibly encroaches on other legislation such as community empowerment. Farmers across Scotland want CAP replacement to deliver for farmers. I sense that what Colin Smyth seeks to achieve slightly veers off this trajectory and starts to involve other parties for whom this bill is not necessarily relevant. Turning to John Finnie's Amendment 24, also in this group, again similarly to Colin Smyth's Amendment 36, the list of objectives takes the focus off the bill. I feel aspects of John Finnie's amendment would be better suited introduced at a later date through well-researched policy rather than using this bill. Convener, my amendment in short keeps the principles focused on agriculture.
Thank you, Rachel. I'd now like to move to John Finnie to speak to Amendment 24 and any other amendments in the group. John.
Thank you, Convener, and can I thank all the people who've contributed and organisations contributed with briefings to our deliberations today. The bill, as others have said, introduces power to make changes to regulations and payment systems without defining the scope nor the purpose of those changes. WWF, for instance, said this introduces considerable uncertainty at a time when ambitious action is required of the sector. And we know that agriculture is one of the key sectors where policy levers to reduce emissions are devolved to Scotland. The Scottish Government has missed its emission targets for a second year in a row. And as Link said, the opportunity must be seized to signal how regulations and related funding for agriculture will change in the years ahead to deliver broad benefits for society. I'll not repeat, given your comments about brevity, Convener. I agree with much of what Colin Smyth has said. It is important that we see a just transition, and whilst there may on the surface appear a lot of common ground between the three amendments, it is about priorities and emphasis, and what's quite clear is the status quo is not an option. We must build on existing frameworks. Just picking out a few from my extensive list, achieving greenhouse gas emission targets, that's fundamental. It's not in the Conservative amendment, which of course highlights improving profitability. Similarly, subparagraph E, maintaining and enhancing animal welfare, well, this would go some way to addressing the concerns that have been voiced in recent days about the export of live calves, for instance. Encouraging public access to and public understanding of agriculture, maintaining, increasing population in rural areas, something I know the Cabinet Secretary and I have shared an interest in the past, and ensuring sustainable livelihoods and improving working conditions among crofters and farmers, particularly those working in marginal land. And my comment about local supply chains, I think, is pertinent too. Colin Smyth Amendment 36, which I will be supporting, not least because the phrase delivering flourishing rural communities and improving working conditions within the sector. Rachel Hamilton's 37, I will not be supporting. The reference to climate change says, quote, increasing the resilience of the agriculture sector with climate change. And that's without reference to the Climate Change Act. It's entirely insular and industry self-in. I'll leave my comments there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. Now, there are a couple of members at the moment who've indicated they want to speak. I'm going to come first to Stewart Stevenson, then followed by the Deputy Convener, Maureen Watt. Stewart.
Thank you, Convener. I always look carefully at the drafting, and most of my comments relate to that, although to some extent to policy. The first thing I would say in Colin Smyth's amendment may only be exercised by, etc., and then must not undermine the ability of the regulation to contribute to the achievement of any other objective. So these two things coupled. Similarly, in John Finnie's amendment, may only be exercised and must not undermine the ability. Now, I've got a difficulty with that because it may well be proper to proceed with something that increases resilience, but potentially might affect things like profitability in the short term. Because how do you measure profitability? I mean, you have to render accounts once a year and you know if you're profitable that year. And the benefit may be further on. So I think there's a genuine difficulty. And I mean, as an engineer, the old saying is every new solution brings new problems. So I just think trying to discount a big benefit under one heading against a small disbenefit in another in legislation simply isn't going to work. And that applies to Colin Smyth and John Finnie's amendments. Now, similarly, I've got a difficulty with an omission from all three lists, and this includes Rachel Hamilton's, in that there isn't a direct reference to community per se. At J in Colin's list, it says deliver flourishing rural communities. But actually, I think the benefits of agriculture extend beyond rural communities. So I think that's more restrictive than we might want it to be. But finally, the big omission from all the lists is by restricting the regulations to only affecting agriculture, we rule out regulations that do affect agriculture but require and provide for collaboration with other sectors. And I think that's a very, very fundamental problem with lists. I've always got a big problem with lists per se. I personally rather see things more concisely expressed because I've not got a difficulty with what people are trying to achieve there. I just think the expression of it in these three amendments is unlikely to commend itself to me or other members. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you very much, Stuart. I'm now going to move to the Deputy Convener, Maureen Watt. Maureen.
Thank you, Convener, and good morning, everybody. Notwithstanding the technical difficulties that have been highlighted by my colleague Stewart Stevenson, I would like to point out that these amendments are completely undemocratic. They haven't been consulted upon. If we look at our Stage 1 report, there was no mention of these things in the Stage 1 report. Indeed, there was broad stakeholder support for the principles underpinning the bill, which is an important mechanism to facilitate the smooth transition for the agricultural sector as it leaves the EU. So this is purely a technical bill to ensure payments continue after we leave the European Union. And we recognised in the Stage 1 report, of course, that people want to see further development of policy in agriculture, but this is not what this bill is about. Therefore, given the fact that we haven't consulted on all the proposals for these amendments that are being proposed now, I really can't see how we can accept them.
Thank you, Maureen. And I'd now like to invite the Cabinet Secretary, Fergus Ewing, to make comments as he sees appropriate. Fergus Ewing.
Thank you very much, Convener, and good morning to everyone. It may take me some time to go through and do justice to the proposers of the 3 amendments, and I will seek to do that. During stage 1, Convener, there was a debate about including a purpose clause in the bill, but as these 3 amendments demonstrate, that does mean different things to different people. Indeed, I'm bound to reflect and gently comment that the 3 proposers in their presentations were not uncritical of the other proposals being put forward. But I am clear, Convener, that part 1 of the bill is about process, not policy. It would, I submit, be inappropriate in this framework bill, which is required for a specific purpose of enabling the simplification and improvement of existing CAP schemes, to set a direction of travel before we know exactly where we need to go. Now, I understand why people wish a set of objectives of future policy, but I would remind members that following a debate which took place in plenary session in the Scottish Parliament on the 10th of January 2019, last year, this Parliament has already agreed by resolution of Parliament to establish a group to inform future policy on farming and food production. That decision was based on a suggestion from Mr Rumbles, which I was happy to take forward and have taken forward, Convener. So Parliament has already spoken on the process we should follow, and I believe we should not preempt that process. Indeed, it could be construed as being disrespectful to Parliament as a whole were we to do so this morning. Rather, I would suggest that the group be allowed to complete the task it was given by Parliament as instructed by Parliament. So, any purpose clause on the face of the bill, even one that, as these amendments do, confines itself to the use of powers in part 1 of this bill, would per se interfere with and cut across a process which Parliament agreed is appropriate and indeed, Convener, is nearly completed. Convener, I would also ask members to consider carefully what they're asking for here. We need not only this bill, but also we need the secondary legislation under this bill to be in place by the end of this year. There is a timing issue here. We need that legislation, primary and secondary, to be in place by the end of this year in order to ensure that we can continue to make payments to farmers. And that means that time is critical. Now, all 3 amendments do raise the risk that we would run out of time. We need to know what must be done by adding complex new requirements, as each of these proposals would do. Complex requirements and tests that would limit our ability to use these new powers to ensure that CAP schemes will work in 2021. For example, if, Convener, measures such as these had been in place in respect of convergence funding, and we had had to balance all of these objectives set out in any one of the 3 lists in respect of the decisions that we made, I believe we would not have been able to disburse the first tranche of payments of convergence monies to farmers and crofters in Scotland, as indeed we did in early March. In other words, if we had had to go through this complex process, then the vital financial support that we were able to give, just incidentally and fortuitously before the COVID lockdown, would not have been in the bank accounts of those farmers and crofters, because we had created a complex process which prevented us from achieving that task in the timeless fashion with which it was dispatched. Now, I'm still determined to start making simplifications and improvements from 2021, but I'm bound to conclude, Convener, that if we introduce any or all of these amendments with the tests set out in them, then I do not think that we would be in a position to prepare regulations for the end of this year, and that may mean that no useful change can have effect next year. Now, Amendments 36 and 24 both seek to limit the Scottish Government to only making regulations under Part 1 of the bill for one or more of the list of objectives set out in subsection 2 of amendment. These are closed lists, Convener. So that means that we would not be able to do anything else, no matter how desirable that might be part of our simplification and stability approach. Some of the objectives relate to matters like biodiversity, water and air quality, animal welfare, plant and soil health that are already provided for in legislation, including the Climate Change Emissions Reduction Targets Scotland Act 2019, the Nature Conservation Scotland Act 2004, and the Animal Health and Welfare Scotland Act 2006. So it does follow, Convener, with these laws already being in place, that ministers could not use this bill to legislate in a way that circumvented or was incompatible with those existing laws. Some of the other objectives are not defined in this bill, so determining what exactly is meant could be hugely problematic. Others are highly subjective, and it's hard to give them, therefore, any meaningful effect in law. Amendment 37, on the face of it, seems, Convener, less onerous, yet it does not define what is meant by any of the principles it sets out, and in effect would prove more difficult to implement. It also requires that all regulations must actually, inverted commas, contribute, close inverted commas, to one of the stated principles. The validity of the regulations may be in question if it can't be shown that they make such a contribution. It's not at all clear to me that this is something that can be definitively established in relation to every regulation that could come forward under this bill, and is therefore prima facie unworkable. Convener, these are complexities and potential unintended consequences of applying such prescriptive lists of objectives to the use of regulations in Part 1. Applying these objectives, some of which are already provided for in environment and animal welfare legislation, would not be straightforward. Working out how to assess potential simplifications or improvements to current CAP schemes against them would be time-consuming, and in all probability, we would not be able to make any change happen in 2021. And yet the plan to do that, to make these changes, was warmly welcomed by farmers and crofters. Worst of all, if we pass these amendments, then it would limit our ability to help our farmers at a time when they need the help most. Finally, Convener, if I could point out that, as I reminded myself this morning when I reread somewhat earlier this morning the policy, financial and explanatory memoranda to this bill, if members address themselves to the policy memorandum paragraph 4, it is set out with the heading Purpose of the Bill. It said, the bill is intended to provide Scottish ministers with regulation-making powers to amend or replace the European Union Common Agricultural Policy elements of retained law in Scotland, and to provide new powers for the collection of agricultural data. Convener, the notes clearly set out the purpose of the bill. It would surely be a risky prospect to have a counter-purpose stated on the face of the bill. For all of those reasons, and with apologies for the length of these arguments, but I have sought to do justice to each of the amendments, Convener, by addressing them in detail, I would respectfully suggest that these amendments be resisted. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ewing. It's always difficult being in a different room that I can't encourage brevity amongst members, but you have given them justice, and I would ask all members to remember brevity. And I'm going to, on that note, ask Colin Smyth to wind up and press or withdraw your amendment. Colin.
Thank you, Convener. I mean, first of all, I very much recognise the challenges there are finding wording that meets our aims here. However, I don't believe that's impossible if there is a commitment from everybody to work together to achieve that. I would remind all members that it was the unanimous view of this committee at stage 1 that the government should consider bringing forward a purpose clause. So I have to say I'm somewhat surprised that the principle of a purpose clause appears to have been changed, although we do have form when it comes to having a stage 1 report and doing the very opposite when it comes to the final debate. We have, as a committee, debated purpose clauses in the past. We've debated at great length the objectives within a bill. For example, in the south of Scotland Enterprise Bill, where we agreed a clear set of objectives for that new agency. Therefore, we do have a track record of delivering that, despite the differences in wording at the beginning of these processes. I do think that all 3 purpose clauses, and I haven't criticised the other ones, are all based around a shared view on the need for clarity on what policy changes this bill will underpin. So the Cabinet Secretary has said we should focus on the Farming and Food Production Future Group. I agree with him. But there is absolutely nothing in this bill to do so. It simply gives the government broad policy-making powers without any policy direction at all. And as a committee, we've heard from numerous stakeholders that there is a lack of policy direction when it comes to both this bill and the future agriculture policy. I do believe there is a lot of commonality in the purpose clauses. They are based around broadly similar priorities. That's the need for a new system that better enables environmental sustainability, encourages productivity in the sector, and supports rural communities. It's not surprising that these are consistency between these amendments, given that there are clear consistency amongst many stakeholders on the necessary direction of travel. In fact, two final points the Cabinet Secretary touched on. I simply don't agree that a purpose clause would somehow make it impossible to deliver support and changes in 2021. There's absolutely no basis whatsoever for that particular commitment from the Cabinet Secretary that would happen. Finally, I would just simply make an appeal that there are a number of technical issues that Stewart Stevenson has talked about in terms of wording. He hasn't talked about the principle of a purpose clause not being relevant. That's not surprising, given that the committee agreed at stage one it should be considered. And I do think that if we give a commitment to work together on the wording, then we could deliver a purpose clause that does give that policy direction that, quite frankly, stakeholders are crying out for and is currently lacking.
Thank you, Colin. Can I ask you to press or withdraw your amendment, please?
No, I won't press the amendment at this stage. Simply ask that we get a commitment to at least work with all members in order to try to bring together a consensus on the wording of a purpose clause.
Okay, thank you, Colin. As you're not pressing the amendment, you have actually moved it. So I have to ask, does any member disagree with the request to withdraw the amendment? If you disagree, can I ask you to put a Y in the box if you disagree in the chat room? So no one objects to Colin withdrawing that amendment. So I'm now going to call Amendment 37 in the name of Rachel Hamilton, which has already been debated with Amendment 36. Rachel Hamilton, do you want to move or not move this amendment?
Not move.
Thank you, Rachel. They're going to now move on to call Amendment 1 in the name of John Finnie, grouped with Amendments 8, 11, 14, 28, 29 and 16. I must point out that if Amendment 14 is agreed to, I cannot call Amendment 28 due to a preemption. John Finnie, can I ask you please to move Amendment 1 and speak to all amendments in the group? John. Sorry, hold on. John, I'm going to pause you. And I've made a note to myself to do this at the beginning, and I apologise for interrupting you in full flow. But at the start of this, as I've always done when I talk about agriculture, I've declared that I have an interest in a family farming partnership. And therefore, for the record, I would like to repeat that so that no one is in any doubt regarding my interest. I believe that Peter Chapman may also want to make a declaration, and I also believe that Stewart Stevenson may want a declaration. John, I apologise, I'm going to bring in Peter and then Stewart.
Hi, thank you, Convener, for reminding us all that we do need to make that declaration, and I do so now and declare that I am a partner in a farming business in the northeast of Scotland.
Thank you, Peter. And Stewart Stevenson, I wonder if you want to make a declaration of interest.
I own a very small registered agricultural holding from which I derive no income. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you, Stewart, and I'm glad we got that out of the way. And I apologise, John Finnie, for interrupting you, but I'd now like to move to you and ask you to move Amendment 1 and speak to all the amendments in the group. John.
We'll speak to the others in that group, which covers procedure in the regulations. And I alluded earlier to briefings that the committee had received, and one that we all received was from the Law Society of Scotland about how the bill could be improved in terms of procedure, and indeed later on with consultation. And this was particularly regard to changing existing arrangements in the bill for future decision making from the negative to the affirmative procedure. Now, I readily acknowledge that, as has been said at committee many times, there's scrutiny regardless of the procedure, but ensuring the active approval of Parliament seems better. For instance, I'm also grateful to my colleague Colin Smyth for supporting, and the public may expect, if we were dealing with things like the provision of information, power of entry, inspection, seizure and search, penalties, the creation of offences, that should have the active approval of Parliament. So I hope members would agree with that. Also, in relation to amendments 28 and 29, I support the Cabinet Secretary's amendment.
Thank you very much, John. I'm now going to come to the Cabinet Secretary to speak to Amendment 28 and other amendments in the group. Cabinet Secretary.
Convener, my amendments 28 and 29. My amendments 28 and 29 relate to the wider changes I'm seeking to make to Section 8 in Group 7. Those changes are primarily to ensure that there is alignment with the approach being taken in the UK Agriculture Bill on switching from retained EU law powers on marketing standards to freestanding domestic law powers. The UK Bill's provisions allow for the affirmative procedure for making regulations. Amendment 28 therefore provides for changing the procedure from negative to affirmative, while Amendment 29 would simply alter the wording of Section 8.5 to reflect this change in procedure. Regarding Amendment 14, noting that John Finnie's Amendment 14 preempts my Amendment 28, I do acknowledge his thoughtful approach in specifying a list of circumstances in which affirmative procedure should be applied, but I hope, Convener, that he will now accept there is now no need for that approach, given my willingness to apply the affirmative procedure to any use of the power. I therefore hope he will not press his Amendment 14, but if he does, I would encourage members to resist it and instead support my Amendments 28 and 29. Turning to the other amendments 1, 8 and 11, I fully understand why members want additional scrutiny on regulation-making powers under Sections 2, 5 and 6. Normally, switching from negative to affirmative procedure would appear to be a fairly innocuous change, and one which government often concedes, Convener, and I have done so myself in previous bills, as have many of my Cabinet colleagues. But these are not normal times. The process is time-constrained, not least because of other pressures on Parliament and your committee, Convener, and the impact of the coronavirus, which means that the bill will not be concluded before recess. We need this bill and the regulations thereunder to be in place by the end of this year, or there is a risk of delaying payments. As I said in Group 1, I intend to start introducing changes under Sections 2, 5 and 6 for the start of the CAP year in 2021. Now, that begins in January, so if we don't do so, such is the complexity of the CAP system, that changes could not be brought in part way through that year, and we would be waiting until 2022 before any simplifications or improvements could be made to any CAP scheme. The situation is made even more complex by Brexit and the resulting multitude of secondary legislation that's required by the end of this year, much of it relating to the rural economy and likely to come to this committee. That already presents an incredibly challenging legislative timetable, both for government and for Parliament. I'm also conscious of the amendments still to be considered at Group 3 relating to consultation. Again, a statutory requirement to consult on draft regulations would inevitably lengthen the process still further, but we will debate those separately. I'm not unsympathetic, Convener, to either issue. The desire to ensure a more substantive role for Parliament and also for stakeholders in the development of the content of regulations are things that normally I and the government would and have supported. But I don't think we can do either, never mind both, and be confident of passing regulations by the end of 2020. That would allow changes to be made to the current CAP schemes during the transition period between 2021 and 24, which I've committed to, and which previously has had the support of Parliament. I therefore cannot support John Finnie's amendments 1, 8 and 11, and I hope that members will agree and resist these amendments. On Amendment 16, Mr Finnie seeks to achieve a similar approach to regulations made under Section 10 where they contain provision regarding enforcement. As with Section 8, there is no time constraint relating to regulations being made under Section 10, and having conceded on the principle of moving to an affirmative procedure for Section 8, I'm happy to consider doing likewise for Section 10, but I would respectfully ask Mr Finnie not to move his amendment to allow further consideration here. It may be less complex simply to switch the entire procedure to affirmative for Section 10, as we have indeed proposed for Section 8. In summary, Convener, I would ask the committee to vote for my amendments 28 and 29 as preferable to Amendment 14, and I would respectfully suggest the committee vote against 1, 8 and 11. And on Amendment 16, I would thank Mr Finnie for the work that he has done with the government, but I would respectfully ask him not to press Amendment 16 on the basis that I will look at coming forward with a simpler, more straightforward approach at stage 3. And I hope that that is helpful and clear.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. Colin Smyth, I can bring you in, but it will have to be briefly, Colin.
I think it's important to highlight my support for these amendments. A number of the amendments were based on advice helpfully provided by the Law Society of Scotland. John Finnie is obviously clearly more nimble on his feet than I am and tabled those amendments, but obviously my support is registered beside them. I think we'd be forgiven from the previous discussion for forgetting that this bill introduces wide regulation making powers, and there is a need for clarity on what they'll be used for. I think it was entirely inappropriate that a negative procedure was being used for these regulations, and it's important that an affirmative procedure is used at all times during the course of the changes from this bill. So I'm more than happy to fully support the amendments tabled by John.
Thank you, Colin. And I'm now going to come back to John Finnie to wind up. And John, could you just confirm, my understanding is you moved the amendment when you originally spoke, so you now have to press or withdraw the amendment once you've wound up, Mr Finnie. John.
Yeah, thank you very much, Convener. And surrounded by paper, as we all are here, I should have alluded to the preemptions, as the Cabinet Secretary did in his discussions there. 14 preempting 28 and 29 is preempted by Amendment 15. And here's what the Cabinet Secretary says in relation to Amendments 14 and 16, and when the time comes, it wouldn't be my intention to press this. However, my colleague Colin Smyth is entirely right. I think if there's a will, there's a way, and as we'll come on to discuss, I think there's no harm in having scrutiny, and I know that our committee would always be very keen to make every effort to facilitate the Scottish Government programme, particularly when it comes to remuneration of our crofters and farmers. So I will press Amendment 1.
Thank you very much, John, for that. So the question that I have now is Amendment 1 be agreed. Are we all agreed? If you do not agree, press a D. I already have a D in the chat room, so therefore we will go to a vote. My question is those in favour of the amendment, please press Y now. Thank you. Those, hold on, sorry, I'm just waiting for the clerks to do the tally. Those against the amendment, please press no, N now. And those who wish to abstain, press the A now, please. Thank you. I can confirm the votes were as follows. Peter Chapman, Rachel Hamilton, Edward Mountain, John Finnie and Colin Smyth voted for the amendment. Emma Harper, Richard Lyle, Angus MacDonald, Stewart Stevenson, Maureen Watt and Mike Rumbles voted against the amendment. There are 5 votes for the amendment, 6 votes against the amendment, so the amendment is not agreed. I am now going to call Amendment 2 in the name of John Finnie, grouped with amendment as shown in the groupings. I must point out that if Amendment 15 is agreed to, I cannot call Amendment 29 in the group. John Finnie, can I ask you to move Amendment 2, please, and speak to all amendments in the group? John.
Thank you, Convener, and I move Amendment 2. Now, the call here is for Scottish Ministers to consult such persons as they consider appropriate. Now, this in itself may seem strange because you would have thought this is a well-established practice. It's certainly best practice, and I would have thought that engagement can be done expeditiously on occasions when it suits the Scottish Government, and I hear the recurring theme of the challenges this will place in terms of time frame. I say again, best practice is that you consult with people, particularly on some of the significant matters that are being deliberated upon here. So I hope members will support that. I acknowledge my colleague Colin Smyth co-signed some in that relating to engagement before laying a draft of a Scottish SI making regulations. Again, this would be best practice. If I understand the Cabinet Secretary correctly, he in any case would ordinarily be telling us that there's ongoing engagement, so this should not be an onerous process. I support the amendments 18 and 20. I beg your pardon, I support the amendments 18 and 20 in my colleague Colin Smyth's names. I don't support 18A and 20 and Rachel Hamilton's and Peter Chapman's 23 I don't support, and 3A of that is entirely subjective and bureaucracy that the Conservative Party continually purports to oppose, so I won't be supporting Mr Chapman's amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, John. I'm now going to call Peter Chapman to speak to Amendment 23 and the other amendments in the group. Peter.
Thank you, Convener. My amendment, Amendment 23, seeks to ensure that the organisations and the people who will be affected are consulted on the prospect of a ceiling on payments, also known as capping. The idea of capping farm payments is an unwelcome prospect for many farmers, and therefore for Scottish ministers to simply have the unchallenged power to introduce this without proper consultation would, I believe, be a very serious situation. There is also the ability in these sections to move monies from Pillar 1 to Pillar 2, which is again an area of great importance to all farmers. In my opinion, this is one of the most important parts of the bill, and we cannot give the government free rein to decide these issues. The voice of farming, whom it will affect and who have profound and will have profound consequences on, their voices must be heard. By ensuring the government must consult and then report on findings, there will be a more informed view of what agricultural stakeholders think and whether it is appropriate to introduce any ceiling on payments or any movement of money between Pillars 1 and 2. Farmers are keen to ensure that they play their part in reducing emissions, but for too long they have done so with little or no financial support, mostly through good practice and goodwill. The second half of my amendment mentions the Climate Change Act 2009, and any capping must ensure that funds generated as a result of capping must be used to ensure farming becomes more productive, efficient, and delivers environmental benefits, and delivers on our climate change objectives. And to finish, Convener, we support all the other amendments in this group. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Could I now move to Colin Smyth to speak to Amendment 18 and any other amendments in the group? Colin.
Thank you, Convener. Again, I support the majority of amendments in this group, which all look to ensure regulations made within bill are subject to appropriate consultation. We can't forget this bill includes very broad regulation-making powers without that sense of policy intention behind them. Many of the changes proposed within these sections could have a huge impact on those directly affected, and it's critical that the government consults and seeks agreement on them. Specifically, Amendment 18 in my name calls for consultation on regulations made under sections 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8 and 10. This suggestion is covered by various amendments lodged by John Finnie, and I'm happy to support these amendments, and if common sense does prevail and they are agreed by the time we come to vote on Amendment 18, I will not press my amendment. Similarly, Amendment 20 in my name has the same intention as Amendment 19 from John. That is a clear requirement to consult prior to issuing regulations defining agricultural activity. I believe the requirements set out in mine are slightly clearer, as it specifies that those with an interest in the regulations and those representing those affected should be consulted. However, the outcome of both amendments is likely to be the same, so I'm happy to support either. Amendments 18A and 28 from Rachel Hamilton both look to remove a requirement to consult those that the government consider likely to have an interest in the regulation. I imagine the intention here is to ensure that the consultation is focused on those directly affected. However, I believe that is potentially too narrow. For example, the requirement to consult those interested as well as those affected would ensure that environmental or animal welfare groups have a chance to input if relevant. I do not think it is unreasonable to suggest all interested groups are consulted. Amendment 23 by Peter Chapman calls for the government to not only consult but report on the outcome of this consultation. Similarly, report on how regulations contribute to our climate change ambitions. I believe this would provide a useful scrutiny and accountability, and it's certainly something this committee should be in favour of.
Thank you very much, Colin. And Rachel Hamilton, can you speak to Amendment 18A and any other amendments in the group? Rachel.
Thank you, Convener. I originally sought to remove such persons as they consider are likely to have an interest in the regulations. However, upon reflection, I would have not been able to support John Finnie's amendments, which seek to consult on sections 2 to 6 of the bill. I will therefore not move this amendment, as I believe it would result in inconsistencies with the process of consultation throughout different sections of the bill itself. I would ask of the Cabinet Secretary that he gives clarifications that should amendments regarding consultation are passed, that he keeps the focus of the consultation on purely those involved in agriculture and not open up to wider an audience, which could inadvertently involve people who do not have a good reason to be involved in the shaping of the future of agriculture. With regards to the other amendments in the group, I firmly believe that the consultation process is required when considering modifying or changing the existing CAP legislation. We do not want Scottish ministers to simply bulldoze through changes without consulting diligently with those who their action will affect. SLE say large parts of this bill provide powers for Scottish ministers to simplify, improve and modify current regulations and bring forward further legislation. We feel a commitment to consult with relevant individuals or stakeholders is important to ensure Scottish Government understand the ambition of the sector to embrace change and maximise opportunities rather than sticking with the status quo. I will vote yes to all the others in the group, and I will not move my amendments 20A and 18A, Convener.
Thank you very much, Rachel. Richard Lyle's the only member that wishes to come in, and Richard, could I ask you very briefly to come in before I go to the Cabinet Secretary? Richard.
Thank you, Convener. I'll try to be brief. But, Convener, we are presented with a somewhat dizzying array of amendments requiring ministers to consult, some of which I appreciate relate to whatever regulatory procedure is followed. But I'm puzzled why so many of our members have sought to lay these amendments when in our Stage 1 report we concluded there was no need to require statutory consultation. I'm afraid I'm one of those members who's becoming a little bit fed up at people seemingly to agree a collective position at our Stage 1 report, and then we promptly ignore it when we get to Stage 2 and 3. The Cabinet Secretary gave undertakings around consultation at Stage 1. We accepted those. I feel we should not be debating these amendments at this present time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lyle, for that. Cabinet Secretary, can I ask you if you have any brief comments in relation to this, Cabinet Secretary?
Well, again, I have a duty, I think, in stage 2 to do all proposed amendments justice, Convener, and I do need to take the time to do that with respect. I have given clear commitments at stage 1 on consultation. These haven't changed. I said then we will take steps to make sure there is sufficient consultation of those who are closely involved with the impact of any proposed changes or measures in draft regulations. I also said we will not make major changes without appropriate consultation and engagement. We always do that. We come to Parliament and we are constantly held to account by this committee. As Mr Lyle has just reminded us, Convener, in the Stage 1 reports, both REC and the DPLR, both committees indicated they were satisfied with these assurances given in good faith and repeated again in good faith, and they were satisfied with those assurances on consulting both with stakeholders and with Parliament, and they're most sincerely given, and that has been my invariable practice over my period as Cabinet Secretary. For reasons similar to which I've set out in relation to the amendments at Group 1 and 2, and therefore which I won't repeat, Convener, I would hope that the committee will accept my voluntary undertakings and resist these Group 3 amendments. I think it would be useful to remind the committee of the consultation and engagement carried out to date. I consulted very widely on the plan for simplification and stability. We have published the recommendations of the task force on the 13th of January 2020. All of that work will inform the priorities and content of the draft regulations. The main reasons I'm reluctant to accept these amendments is because of what they do potentially to timescales. The Scottish Government approach to consultation provides for a standard 12-week period for submissions to be made, for all appropriate submissions to be published and also analysed before Government sets out its response. There are occasions when timescales can be reduced, but we are usually looking, Convener, at a minimum of 6 months for such a process. I've already alluded to the fact that this bill will not be completed before the recess. There is clearly a time pressure here to make sure that farmers and crofters can avail themselves of benefits which I believe many of them may well wish to flow from improvements and simplifications. And I would point to 2 matters that were predominant in the recommendations of the task force and where members have already had 5 months, Convener, to consider them, namely amending the system of penalties to make it less harsh and occasionally oppressive as it has been to farmers and crofters, penalising them for making modest errors in a disproportionate fashion. And secondly, on simplifying the process for inspections. Now, if it is the case that, as I suspect, farmers and crofters want these changes to be made, the last thing that they would want is for the Scottish Government to be prevented from introducing these changes because of an additional extended consultation process which places a procedural straitjacket on the Government's ability to deliver what I believe farmers and crofters want. So I do believe, Convener, that my undertakings given already having been uniformly implemented for the past 4 years are ones which, as they were accepted at stage 1, will, I hope, be accepted in stage 2, and the requirement for a statutory timetable is just simply misplaced, is not required, and that we can proceed to work together with the substantial measure of scrutiny that this committee and Parliament always exerts.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. And I'm now coming to John Finnie to wind up, please. And can I ask you to press or withdraw your amendment, Mr. Finnie? John.
Thank you, Convener. Yes, Ms Hamilton's comments, and indeed the Conservative colleagues, it continually sounds like give us the money, don't talk to anyone else. And I would say this is public money, and crofting and farming do not operate in a vacuum. It's public money. Mr Lyle's comments, I'm sure he would vigorously suggest he's not seeking to frustrate debate, but the whole purpose of this process is to engage in discussion. This is a stage 2 debate, and things don't stand still, and we're not slaves to previous positions that we've taken, and clearly everything is competent or we wouldn't be deliberating over it. I hear what the Cabinet Secretary says repeatedly, but I actually think he's making the case to actually support the amendments that are in front of us here. No one is seeking to frustrate progress. No one is seeking additional extended. If, as we're continually told, and we've heard again from the Cabinet Secretary, there is this ongoing engagement, and indeed many believe that the farming sector is at the heart of government policy decision making, then this isn't a challenge at all. This isn't a challenge at all. I will be pressing I think no harm ever comes from consultation. We know that it can take many different forums, and indeed we've had many documents in front of us on this committee and other committees where there's been no consultations. That's never very helpful. It can be turned around very quick when there's a way. So I will be pressing to, Convener. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Finnie. The question, therefore, we have at this stage is that Amendment 2 be agreed? Are we all agreed? No, we are not agreed. Some Ds have appeared already in the chat box, so we're not agreed. Therefore, we will go to a vote. Can I ask those people in favour of the amendment, put Y in the box now, please? Thank you. Can I ask those people who are against the amendment place an N now, please? And anyone who wishes to abstain, place an A in the box now, please. Thank you. I can confirm the voting as follows. The following people voted for the amendment: Peter Chapman, Rachel Hamilton, Edward Mountain, John Finnie and Colin Smyth. Emma Harper, Richard Lyle, Angus MacDonald, Stewart Stevenson, Maureen Watt and Mike Rumbles voted against the amendment. No one abstained. There are 5 votes for the amendment. There are 6 votes against the amendment. The amendment is not agreed. I now call the Amendment 3 in the name of John Finnie, already debated with Amendment 2. John Finnie, to move or not move?
Not move, Convener.
Thank you. The question we come to now is that Section 2 be agreed. Are we all agreed? If anyone disagrees, please put D in the box now. No one has disagreed.
Convener, point order. I was pressing the amendment. If you look at the chat box.
Sorry. You want to, right. It hasn't been moved formally, so as far as I'm aware, it cannot. I'm just checking. Mr. Can you?
I'll move it.
Hold on. If he hasn't moved it, what?
He wants to move John Finnie's amendment.
Yeah, can you do that?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry, Mr. Lyle. So does you are therefore moving Amendment 3? Sorry?
Amendment 3 in the name of John Finnie.
Sorry, yes. Richard Lyle, just to confirm, you are moving Amendment 3 that is in the name of John Finnie. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. So therefore, I ask everyone, are we agreed to Amendment 3? If you disagree, put a D in the box. Thank you. That we are not agreed, therefore we will go to a vote. Can I ask, we're voting on Amendment 3, to those who agree to Amendment 3, put a Y in the box now, please. Those who disagree with Amendment 3, put an N in the box now, please.
Convener, my end's not. Convener, sorry, my end is not showing up in the chat box. Sorry, yeah.
Sorry, I'm now totally confused. Okay, those who wish to abstain, put an A in the chat box now, please.
Yes.
Okay, thank you for that. I confirm the votes are as following. Those for the amendment are Peter Chapman, Rachel Hamilton, Edward Mountain, John Finnie and Colin Smyth. Those against the amendment are Emma Harper, Richard Lyle, Angus MacDonald, Stewart Stevenson, Maureen Watt and Mike Rumbles. There therefore are 5 votes for the amendment, 6 votes against the amendment, and therefore the amendment is not agreed. The question therefore is that section 2 be agreed. Are we all agreed? If you disagree, put a D in the box. We are agreed. Therefore, I'm going to move on to Amendment 4 in the name of John Finnie in the group on its own. John Finnie, can I ask you to move and speak to Amendment 4, please? John.
Thank you, Convener. This won't take long, Convener. This is about the conferral of functions under Section 3 and the power to provide for the operation of CAP legislation beyond 2020. And it's simply, this was a suggestion of the Law Society of Scotland, inserts the word appropriate so that it will now read that may confer functions in any appropriate person in connection with or with the making of a determination in respect of a year. I'll conclude there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Finnie. No other members asked to speak on this, so Cabinet Secretary, can I ask you for a brief contribution?
Yes, may I thank John Finnie for his comments. The term is undefined for the purposes of this bill, and I'm not absolutely clear what benefit adding the word appropriate here would actually have. But ministers could rightly be challenged in the highly unlikely event, Convener, that they try to confer a function on an inappropriate person. So if this is something that the committee feels would be advantageous and improve the bill, I'm happy to accept this amendment.
Thank you very much, Cabinet Secretary. And John Finnie, can I ask you to very briefly wind up and press or withdraw the amendment, please, John?
I'll simply press. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you very much, John, for doing that. So the question we have at this stage is Amendment 4 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We are not agreed. So we are going to go to a vote on this. Can I ask those people in favour of Amendment 4 type yes in the, or Y, sorry, in the box? Thank you. Those, wait, sorry, I'm getting into trouble for jumping ahead of the clerks. Dangerous. Okay, and those who are against the amendment, please type N in the box now. Okay, and those who wish to abstain, type an A in the box, please. Okay, so this is the results of this vote is going to be a roll call. I'm sure there was a reason for having it. Those in favour of the votes are Emma Harper, Richard Lyle, Angus MacDonald, Stewart Stevenson, Maureen Watt, Peter Chapman, Rachel Hamilton, Edward Mountain, John Finnie, Mike Rumbles and Colin Smyth. There are no votes against it and no one has abstained. Therefore, there are 11 votes for this amendment and therefore it is unanimously agreed. I'm now going to call Amendment 5 in the name of John Finnie, already debated with Amendment 2. John Finnie, to move or not move?
Not move, Convener.
Maureen Watt, do you want to come in and say something and move this amendment? Could you explain your disagreement, please?
Yes, thank you, Convener. I just want to press this to a vote at this stage. You know, we often get these not moved at stage 2 and they come back at stage 3. So I'd like to get it, see what the committee thinks at this stage.
Okay, therefore I will call the Amendment 5 put in the name of John Finnie, moved by Maureen Watt. The question is, are we all agreed? Does anyone disagree? Right, we have some disagreements, therefore we will go to a vote. The question on Amendment 5 is, those people who agree, please type a Y now. Okay. Those people who disagree with this amendment, please type an N. And anyone who wishes to abstain, please press an A. Right, thank you. No one's wished to press an A. Those people in for the amendment are Peter Chapman, Rachel Hamilton, Edward Mountain, John Finnie and Colin Smyth. Those people against it are Emma Harper, Richard Lyle, Angus MacDonald, Stewart Stevenson, Maureen Watt and Mike Rumbles. There are 5 votes for, there are 6 votes against. Therefore, Amendment 5 is not agreed. The question at this stage is that Section 3 be agreed. Are we all agreed? No one disagrees, therefore Section 3 is agreed. I move on to the next Amendment 38 in the name of Peter Chapman in a group on its own. Peter Chapman, can I ask you please to move and speak to Amendment 38?
Thank you, Convener. My amendment number 38 seeks to ensure that should there be any modification of the payment system, for example, capping of individual payments, and should that result in surplus funds, that these surplus funds are fully reinvested back into Scottish farming. We must ensure that all monies allocated to farming from the central budget remain within the agricultural portfolio. So therefore, we cannot let any government in this or in the next parliamentary session siphon off funds into other budgetary areas. So this amendment is needed to give this cast iron guarantee, and I am sure that the farming community would expect nothing less than for any surplus funds or savings to be kept in the budget and not moved elsewhere. And I move the amendment in my name, Convener.
Thank you very much. No other members asked to speak, so I'm going to ask the Cabinet Secretary very briefly, please, Cabinet Secretary.
Yes, thank you, Convener. I listened carefully to Mr Chapman. I understand the sentiment behind his arguments, but I don't believe his amendment is needed. The amendment is, I would respectfully suggest, Convener, unnecessary. There already are reporting and monitoring mechanisms in the Scottish Government budgetary process. Any regulations brought forward under this section of the bill will probably require a business and regulatory impact assessment, a BRIA, to be conducted. That assessment would have, of necessity, to include consideration of the effect of moving funding from one support mechanism to another. Let me be quite clear, Convener, about the specific example that Mr Chapman gave of the introduction of a cap on the level of Pillar 1 payments, for example. No such measure would be introduced without consultation. And moreover, we have already had consultation of that measure in principle in the Stability and Simplicity document. There's also been consultation in other parts of the UK on these measures. So there's been no shortage of consultation on that, and there would be further consultation were a specific measure to be proposed. Moreover, Convener, this section is the subject of affirmative procedure. This means Parliament will already have the opportunity to scrutinise in detail any proposed modification of the financial provision, and rightly so. I have more here, Convener, but I hope that perhaps that's enough to give the flavour of the reasons for why I do believe that this amendment is not in fact necessary. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cabinet Secretary. Peter Chapman, can I ask you to wind up and press or withdraw your amendment? Peter.
In the face of brevity, I will move my amendment.
Thank you very much, Peter. And the question, therefore, is Amendment 38 be agreed. Are we all agreed? Stewart, I'm assuming that's an N. Sorry, disagree, yes. So thank you. So therefore we are not agreed. Therefore we will go to a vote on Amendment 38. Those in favour, please press a Y in the box now. Those against the amendment, please put an N in the box now. Those who wish to abstain, put an A in the box now, please. Thank you. The results of the votes are as follows. Those in favour of the amendment are Peter Chapman, Rachel Hamilton, Edward Mountain and Colin Smyth. Those against the amendment are Emma Harper, Richard Lyle, Angus MacDonald, Stewart Stevenson, Maureen Watt, John Finnie and Mike Rumbles. There are therefore 4 votes for the amendment and 7 votes against. Therefore, the amendment is not agreed. Can I therefore call Amendment 6 in the name of John Finnie, already debated with Amendment 2. John Finnie to move or not move?
Not moved, Convener.
Okay. Thank you. Richard Lyle, I think you want to move this amendment, or John Finnie's amendment, is that correct?
Correct, Convener.
Okay, therefore Amendment 6 in the name of John Finnie is now being moved by Richard Lyle. Could I ask, are we all agreed? No, we're not agreed. Therefore, we'll go to a vote. Those in favour of the Amendment 6, please press a Y now. Okay, those against the amendment, please press an N now. Those who wish to abstain, please press an A now. Thank you. The results on the vote on Amendment 6 are as follows. Those in favour of the amendment are Peter Chapman, Rachel Hamilton, Edward Manson, John Finnie and Colin Smyth. Those against the amendment are Emma Harper, Richard Lyle, Angus MacDonald, Stewart Stevenson, Maureen Watt and Mike Rumbles. There are 5 votes for the amendment. There are 6 votes against. Therefore, Amendment 6 is not agreed. I therefore ask a question at this stage that Section 4 be agreed. Are we all agreed? Does anyone disagree? No one disagrees. Therefore, I'm going to call Amendment 7 in the name of Mike Rumbles, grouped with Amendments 7A, 42, 22 and 26. Mike Rumbles, please can you move Amendment 7 and speak to all the amendments in the group? Mike.
Thank you, Convener. And good morning to everybody. It's the stated intention of the Scottish Government to bring forward a new bespoke system of agricultural support for Scottish rural businesses by 2024. I fully support the Cabinet Secretary in this aim, but the bill before us today, however, is not such a bill, but nor is it intended to be such a bill. It's a technical bill, largely aimed to ensure current support systems can continue beyond the end of this year. However, when the bill was published, I was concerned that the way sections 2, 3 and 4 were drafted would allow any future government to carry on the current system by regulations and not implement the new bespoke system of farm business support we really need. Now, I fully accept that the intentions of the Cabinet Secretary are entirely honourable in this respect, and he does indeed wish to see a new system for Scotland implemented with a new policy-driven agricultural bill. Of that, I have no doubt. However, the way these sections are drafted would allow a different Cabinet Secretary, even a different Cabinet Secretary from a different party, to allow the current system to continue as it says in Section 3, paragraph 1, quote, for 1 or more years beyond 2020. Quote. That really means in perpetuity. Now, it's our role on this committee to scrutinise and try to improve the bill, to ensure that it does indeed do what it says on the tin. I think the committee has done its job very well during stage 1, with so many witnesses saying that these sections need revising, coming to the unanimous view as it did that these provisions do indeed need to be altered. Now, I said during the stage 1 debate in the Chamber on the general principles of the bill that I wasn't hung up about having a sunset clause limiting the powers in the bill to 2024. What I did say, though, was that I thought that giving the Scottish Government time to the end of the next parliamentary session, which ends in 2026, was perfectly doable. I was very grateful to the Cabinet Secretary when he said in his summing up during the debate that he recognised that I was making a constructive suggestion to improve the bill. I would now like to put on record that Fergus Ewing has indeed been willing to engage positively with constructive suggestions over the period, and as a result, if the committee accepts my amendments, we both recognise that these will fully address the concerns raised by our committee witnesses on this stage issue at stage 1 and improve the bill. If I can now turn to the amendments from both Colin Smyth and John Finnie. As I see it, Colin Smyth's amendments do not do what my amendment and John Finnie's amendment with his subsection 3 causes, I'm afraid to say, some more confusion. I mean no personal criticism of either members of the committee because they are quite rightly free to lodge any amendments they wish. But I would have thought that if Colin Smyth had wanted me to support his Amendment 7A to improve my own amendment, it might have been a good idea to speak to me before we got to the stage 2 debate. So forgive me to both gentlemen, but I would urge members to reject these amendments and support my own, which really will improve the bill. Amendment 22 is a technical amendment to ensure that that happens. So I move Amendment 7.
Thank you very much, Mike. And I'm now going to come to Colin Smyth to ask him to move Amendment 78 and speak to the... 7A. Sorry, I'm getting carried away with myself. I thought we'd got to the end. We haven't. Amendment 7A and speak to the amendments in the group. Colin.
Thank you, Convener. One of the key recurring issues raised within this bill at stage 1 was that the need for a sunset clause to limit the powers introduced in this bill. This was raised by a number of stakeholders from a range of backgrounds who supported it for a number of reasons. It was a key recommendation in our stage 1 report, and similarly was recommended by the Delegated Powers and Law Reform Committee. In my view, there are two key reasons why a sunset clause is needed. Firstly, the general concern about providing ministers with the ability to make secondary legislation on such a wide range of issues indefinitely, and secondly, the need to hold ministers to the proposed timeline, which stated that a new system should be up and running by 2024. So the amendment in my name suggests that sections 2 to 6 of this bill expire at roughly the end of the next parliamentary session in 2026. This gives ministers an additional 2 years beyond their stated timescale. That's time I very much hope they will not use, as I think getting a new system in place by 2024 is of critical importance. However, my amendment, as it's drafted, does provide that extra leeway. Crucially, however, I've included a mechanism which can be used to extend the period for which this legislation is in place if needed. This is in response to the concerns raised about a potential cliff edge in support for the sector. I recognise the seriousness of this risk and have proposed that this is mitigated by allowing the legislation to be extended by a year at a time, up to a maximum of 5 years. Again, this should very much be treated as a last resort in case of exceptional circumstances, particularly as the amendment already provides an additional 2 years beyond the government's current timescale. Any extension would be subject to affirmative procedure and so would need to be agreed by Parliament. Amendment by Mike Rumbles, Amendment 7, would prevent regulation making powers from being used after the end of the next session, but it would allow the legislation to remain in place. While I appreciate that this amendment would address the concern about ministers having regulation making powers, it does not require them to create the new system we so urgently need. That is a key reason why there was so much widespread calls for a sunset clause. Let's be very clear what Amendment 7 means from a legal point of view. The outdated legislation would be in place indefinitely. This risks being the worst of all worlds. No new system, but no freedom to make any necessary changes to the temporary system. Put simply, Mike Rumble's amendment does not do what it says on the tin. I know how this committee works. We've seen that already today, and we know that amendment will be carried. Therefore, I have proposed an amendment to Amendment 7, suggesting that if this is the agreed way forward, that at the very least we ensure that legislation itself falls a further 3 years after the regulation making powers cease. I hope members will look at that amendment based on the actual merits of the amendment, not on who it's spoken to. Again, we'd all hope this legislation is revoked long before then, a new system is in place before 2029, but this would provide a useful backstop. Amendment 26 by John Finnie proposes a similar time frame to my Amendment 42. However, it does not include any contingency to avoid a cliff edge. It does, however, include a requirement for ministers to report on their progress on achieving the policy objectives on an annual basis, which I believe is a useful addition. My amendment is not agreed. I would be happy to support John's, which I believe would make a positive contribution to the bill. However, I would be keen to return to the question of what can be done to prevent a potential cliff edge when we come to stage 3. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Colin. And John Finnie, can I ask you to speak now to Amendment 26 and the other amendments in the group, please?
Thank you, Convener. Thank you, Convener. Yes, indeed. The bill is intended to grant Scottish ministers the power to make changes to the CAP regulations during a transitional period. And now, as I introduced the bill, as my colleagues have said, there's no time limit in the exercise of these powers. And I readily accept the government has provided reassurance that powers would not be used for longer than this is necessary. But the committee, as others have said, and I welcome repentant sinners who now understand the sunset clause was referred to in our stage 1 report. It was very clear the committee's position in this, and others, and I've quoted many of the people who've provided briefings to us. Here's one there from Link. There's a concern that without a time limit being placed on these, transitional arrangements could remain in place for longer than 2021-24 period originally envisaged. And I keep saying the status quo is not an option. We need significant changes in agricultural policy and support to respond to the climate background. So the emergency imperative that we face cannot be open-ended. There must be a commitment to bring forward legislative proposals for a new subsidy system before end of this transition period. I'm grateful for stakeholders who have encouraged colleagues to support Amendment 26. Sets an expiry on the powers related to CAP in 2026, and as Colin Smyth said, it requires ministers to report annually in progress on their policy objectives for agricultural support. Now, I'm sure we'll be told that in any case that we regularly scrutinise, but actually building that in and ensuring the development of future agricultural policy can be scrutinised by the Scottish Parliament as it develops, I think is very important. I'll conclude my comments there. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, John Finnie, for those comments. Now, the now two members who wish to speak in this, Angus MacDonald and Emma Harper. Angus.
Okay, thank you, Convener. I'd be keen to better understand the purpose and effect of Colin Smyth's Amendment 7A. For example, would that create a cliff edge for schemes where there are legacy payments that continue well beyond the original grant? I know Colin's acknowledged the likelihood of a cliff edge, so I'd seek further clarification on that. In addition, on another point, I think we've all agreed to the efficacy of a sunset clause. It's just the extent of that. John Finnie's Amendment 26 and Colin Smyth's Amendment 42 would apply a deadline on sections 5 and 6, but I'm not sure why they would want to end these schemes at a specific point. And I would appreciate an explanation for their inclusion. There's no real suggestion, for example, that the fruit and veg producer organisations does not currently work, but that's an example of retained EU law that we have to bring into devolved law. So we could face a situation of having to re-legislate to create exactly the same age scheme as currently exists, simply to satisfy an arbitrary cut-off point. So clarification on these two main points would be appreciated. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you, Angus, and I'm going to bring Emma in, and then I'm going to come to you, Colin, to see if you want to come back on any of those, but I would ask for brevity. Emma.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning, everybody. I'm interested in picking up what Angus MacDonald's saying about support for fruit and vegetable producer organisations. We took evidence in committee about that, and we spoke about support for fruit and veg organisations to continue in our stage 1 report, and even taking further evidence about expanding the producer organisation support in other areas. So I'd be interested to hear from the Cabinet Secretary to look at how we can maybe include dairy producer organisations to obtain support as well. And as I know that this bill is a technical bill and not a policy bill, but I'd be interested to hear about the future support for other organisations as well as fruit and veg. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma. Colin, you wanted to come in briefly with a comment in response to Angus's. Colin.
Thank you very much, Convener. Very briefly, there would be no requirement for any scheme to fall whatsoever, if included in the government's new agricultural policy, which they've committed to bringing forward by the end of 2024. My Amendment 7A, it means if they haven't done that by 2029, then this legislation would fall. And it does concern me greatly that there does seem to be a suggestion from some members that maybe the new system won't be in place by 2029 if they are concerned that any regulations fall before then. And that clearly is the very reason why we have a sunset clause in the first place.
Thank you very much, Colin. Now the members indicated they wish to speak. So, Cabinet Secretary, over to you. Cabinet Secretary.
Convener, Amendment 7 seeks to time limit the powers in sections 2, 3 and 4 so that they cannot be used after the Scottish elections on 7th of May 2026. And Amendment 22 provides for that expiry provision to come into force on the day after Royal Assent. The Stage 1 report and debate made clear that there was, Convener, an appetite across Parliament for some form of statutory cut-off date for this bill's measures. I understand why members and stakeholders want certainty about the future, though I do hope they also recognise that there's a need to balance this against the current backdrop of uncertainties and the need for government to retain some measure of flexibility to meet future challenges. I'm hopeful today, therefore, Convener, that we can reach a consensus on what that is from the range of amendments before us. As such, I believe a sunset clause preventing the use of powers in sections 2, 3 and 4 beyond 7th of May 2026 would achieve this. And I would thank Mr Rumbles for introducing this proposal, not just today, but in relation to his contribution at stage 1, his helpful contribution to that debate, which effectively suggested this compromise approach. The proposed date makes sense, as it would mean that the powers in sections 2, 3 and 4 be unable to be used beyond the lifetime of the next Parliament. So I think that's a very clear rationale. And that, I hope, provides reassurance that these powers will not be used indefinitely, addressing some of the concerns that other members have raised. And it also means, Convener, that there would be provided an element of breathing space beyond the end of the transition period, which I've committed to from 2021 to 2024, should the current circumstances with Brexit and COVID-19, or indeed future unexpected challenges, cause delays to our intended timetable for developing future rural policy. Turning to Amendment 7A, I thank Mr Smith for explaining his amendment, but I am concerned that it could have unintended consequences of making multi-annual support mechanisms impossible to deliver. In 2029, even although we expect to have moved to new support schemes, we still, Convener, could have, as you will be aware, legacy payments from CAP schemes such as forestry planting grants, where maintenance payments are made on an annual basis and continue far beyond the initial planting and initial grant in relation to the longer-term silvicultural maintenance of the trees. So Amendment 7A could, and I think Angus MacDonald did raise this point, and he is correct to have raised it, it could create an unwelcome cliff edge for such activities which take place over many years, because we need to ensure that we have the CAP rules in place to maintain support in a multi-annual way. So I would urge committee to resist that amendment. On Amendment 26, whilst there's clearly a purpose to applying a sunset clause to 2, 3 and 4, I'm not convinced, Convener, of a similar need in relation to sections 5 and 6, which is what Amendment 26 seeks to do. I'm not inclined to support this, as we would also need new secondary legislation to make any necessary transitional or saving provisions in connection with expiry, which places additional demand on an already pressured Parliament. Lastly, on Amendment 42, also extends a sunset clause to section 5 and 6, as well as an option to extend the 26 date. Again, I'm not convinced of the need to apply a sunset clause to sections 5 and 6. Regarding the option to extend, whilst I appreciate this might be seen to be in favour of the government and provide further flexibility, I am conscious also that many stakeholders and MSPs have expressed their desire to see a firm cut-off date. So for that reason, primarily, I think I would invite members to resist Amendment 42. And in conclusion, I encourage the committee to support Amendments 7 and 22 and ask members to resist the other amendments should they be pressed. Thank you.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. Mike Rumbles, can I ask you to wind up on Amendment 7, please?
Thank you, Convener. Well, contrary to Colin Smith's comments, my amendment, it does what it says on the tin, quite clearly. It means ministers cannot continue to use just regulations to change agricultural support after 2026. It completely implements what we as a committee unanimously agreed, and I hope we can unanimously agree my amendments. Colin Smith's 7A's amendment actually allows ministers to use regulations to 2029. It actually says that in the amendment, and I don't think that's appropriate. That's what his amendment says. So I think personally that it's a flawed amendment to my amendment. So I would urge members not to confuse the issues here, to support my amendments 7 and 22, to come together. I would hope that everyone would agree these unanimously. And I would hope that both Colin Smith and John Finnie would not press their amendments, because I don't think it adds really anything to what I would hope the amendments which could be agreed. I hope so, unanimously. So I will press Amendment 7.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rumbles. Colin Smyth, can I ask you to wind up on Amendment 7A and press or withdraw it, please?
Thank you, Convener. I mean, given that Amendment 7 does not require any new system in 2024, and in fact, at any date, then I certainly will be moving Amendment 7A. There has been concern raised that legal payments may fall after 2029. They would only fall if the government failed to bring forward a new system of legislation before 2029, and in that legislation failed to continue any legacy payments they wish to do so. So it's simply untrue to imply that waiting until 2029, which is significantly longer than the government's commitment to bring forward a new agricultural policy, in some way endangers legacy payments. It would only endanger it if the government failed to include those legacy payments. The crucial point is that Amendment 7 does not require the government to bring forward a new system by 2024. It simply means that the existing system will continue with no new system replacing it. The worst of both worlds, whereby they cannot make new regulations, but the old system stays in place with no requirement for a new system. So I'm happy to move Amendment 7A, because I do think it would send a real concern across many stakeholders that there does appear to be a suggestion that maybe the government are not committed to that 2024 date after all.
Thank you very much, Colin. So the question that we come to now is that Amendment 7A be agreed. Are we all agreed? No, we're not agreed. Therefore, we'll go to a vote on this matter on Amendment 7A. Those in favour, please press Y now. Those against, please press N now. Anyone wish to abstain, press A now, please. Thank you. The results of this vote are as follows. Those in favour of it is Colin Smyth. Those against it are Emma Harper, Richard Lyle, Angus MacDonald, Stewart Stevenson, Maureen Watt, Peter Chapman, Rachel Hamilton, Edward Mountain and Mike Rumbles. There is 1 vote for, there are 10 votes against. Therefore, Amendment 7A is not agreed. Can I ask you, Mike Rumbles, to press or withdraw Amendment 7, please?
I'm pressing Amendment 7.
Okay, the question therefore is that Amendment 7 be agreed. Are we all agreed? No, we're not agreed. Therefore, we'll go to a vote on that. Those in favour of Amendment 7, please press Y now. John Finnie voted on 7A. Okay.
Maybe after this vote.
Thank you. Those against, please press a N. N now. And those who wish to abstain, please press an A now. Just while we're waiting for that, John Finnie, I've got your message. I'll come back to you straight after this vote on that question. If you can bide your time on that, please. Okay, on Amendment 7, The following people were for the amendment: Emma Harper, Richard Lyle, Angus MacDonald, Stewart Stevenson, Maureen Watt, John Finnie and Mike Rumbles. Those against it were Peter Chapman, Rachel Hamilton, Edward Mountain, and there was one abstention, Colin Smyth. There are therefore 7 votes for this amendment, 3 votes against it and 1 abstention. Therefore, Amendment 7 is agreed. Now, Mr Finnie, I think you were concerned I hadn't mentioned your vote in Amendment 7A. I have you recorded as against on Amendment 7A. Could you confirm that is correct, please? John. Sorry, could somebody unmute John Finnie's microphone, please? John.
Yes, thank you, Convener. I had replied in the chat box. Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, and I'm sorry for any confusion. Therefore, I'm now going to call Amendment 23 in the name of Peter Chapman, already debated with Amendment 2. Peter Chapman, would like to move it or not move it?
Move it, Convener.
Thank you, Mr Chapman. The question, therefore, is that Amendment 23 be agreed. As we're not agreed, we're going to go to a vote on that. Can those in favour please put a Y in the box for Amendment 23, please? Thank you. Those against, put an N in the box, please. And anyone who wishes to abstain, put an A in the box, please. Thank you. Those in favour of this amendment is Peter Chapman, Rachel Hamilton, Edward Mountain and Colin Smyth. Those against the amendment is Emma Harper, Richard Lyle, Angus MacDonald, Stewart Stevenson, Maureen Watt, John Finnie and Mike Rumbles. No one abstained. There are 4 votes for this amendment. There are 7 against. Therefore, the amendment is not agreed. I therefore call Amendment 8 in the name of John Finnie, already debated with Amendment 1. John Finnie, to move or not move, please.
Move, Convener.
Thank you very much. The question, therefore, is that Amendment 8 be agreed. We are not agreed. Therefore, we are going to go to a vote on this matter. Those in favour of Amendment 8, please push a Y now. Those against, please put an N now. And those who wish to abstain, put an A now, please. Thank you very much. Then the results on Amendment 8. The following people voted in favour of the amendment: Peter Chapman, Rachel Hamilton, Edward Mountain, John Finnie and Colin Smyth. Those people who voted against the amendment: Emma Harper, Richard Lyle, Angus MacDonald, Stewart Stevenson, Maureen Watt and Mike Rumbles. There were 5 votes for the amendment. There were 6 votes against. Therefore, Amendment 8 is not agreed. I therefore call Amendment 9 in the name of John Finnie, already debated with Amendment 2. John Finnie, to move or not move, please.
Not moved, thank you, Convener.
Richard Lyle, you wish to, I think, move this amendment. Is that correct? Could you confirm that, please?
Yes, Convener.
Okay, so Amendment 9 in the name of John Finnie, which has already been debated, is now being moved by Richard Lyle. Are we all agreed with Amendment 9? No, we're not agreed, therefore we'll go to a vote. Those in favour, please put a Y in the box now, please, Amendment 9. Okay, those against, please put an N in the box now. Those who wish to abstain, please put an A in the box now. Thank you. The results for votes on Amendment 9 are as follows. Those in favour are Peter Chapman, Rachel Hamilton, Edward Mountain, John Finnie and Colin Smyth. Those against are Emma Harper, Richard Lyle, Angus MacDonald, Stewart Stevenson, Maureen Watt and Mike Rumbles. There are 5 votes for the amendment. There are 6 votes against. Therefore, Amendment 9 is not agreed. I therefore want to call Amendment 10 in the name of John Finnie, already debated with Amendment 2. John Finnie, do you wish to move it or not move it, please?
Convener, in my efforts to try and assist you with the passage of this stage 2, I don't intend to move Amendment 10 and a number of other amendments as we come to them.
Thank you, but Mr. Lyle, I think, does want to move this amendment. Therefore, I have to ask if we all agree Amendment 10. Do we agree Amendment 10? No, we don't agree it. Therefore, we're going to go to a division on this, please. Those in favour, please press Y for Amendment 10, please. Okay, those against it, please push an N now, please. And then anyone who wishes to abstain, please press an A now, please. Thank you very much. That we have the votes in for Amendment 10. The following people voted in favour of the amendment: Peter Chapman, Rachel Hamilton, Edward Mountain, John Finnie and Colin Smyth. Those who voted against it were Emma Harper, Richard Lyle, Angus MacDonald, Stewart Stevenson, Maureen Watt and Mike Rumbles. There were 5 votes in favour of the amendment. There were 6 votes against, and therefore Amendment 10 is not agreed. The question at this stage is that Section 5 be agreed. Are we all agreed? Okay, we are all agreed. So therefore I'm going to call Amendment 11 in the name of John Finnie, already debated with Amendment 1. John Finnie, would you like to move this amendment or not move this amendment?
Convener, out of courtesy to my colleagues, I've no intention of moving this amendment, and I'm not quite sure of what my colleagues feel they're achieving by a somewhat childish act in relation to the other matter.
Thank you, Mr. Finnie. I'm not sure. Does any member wish to move this amendment in the fact that Richard Lyle, I think you want to move this amendment. Is that correct? Could you confirm, Mr. Lyle, whether you want to move this amendment?
Correct. I'll move, Convener.
Okay. The question, therefore, is that Amendment 11 in the name of John Finnie, but moved by Mr. Lyle, already debated with Amendment 1. Are we agreed to that? Are we agreed? No, we're not agreed. Therefore, we're going to go to another division on this. Those in favour on Amendment 11, please press Y now. Thank you. Those who wish to abstain, who vote against this, please press a no now, an N. Oh, I was getting ahead of myself there, I apologise. And anyone wish to abstain on this? No. So the votes for the Amendment 11 are as follows. Those in favour of it: Peter Chapman, Rachel Hamilton, Edward Manton, John Finnie and Colin Smyth. Those against it: Emma Harper, Richard Lyle, Angus MacDonald, Stewart Stevenson, Maureen Watt and Mike Rumbles. There are 5, no one abstained. There are 5 votes for this amendment. There are 6 votes against this amendment. Therefore, Amendment 11 is not agreed. I therefore call Amendment 12 in the name of John Finnie, already debated with Amendment 2. John Finnie, to move or not move? Mr. Finnie.
Not moved, Convener, thank you.
Thank you. But Mr. Lyle wants to move this one as well. Is that correct, Mr. Lyle?
Correct, Convener.
Thank you. So Amendment 12 in the name of John Finnie is being moved by Richard Lyle. Are we all agreed with Amendment 11? Sorry, Amendment 12. Sorry, no, we're not agreed. Therefore, we'll go to a division. Therefore, those in favour of this amendment, please press Y now. Okay, therefore, those against this amendment, please press an N now. And anyone want to abstain? Oh. Okay, let me go through this again on Amendment 12. Those in favour of the amendment: Peter Chapman, Rachel Hamilton, Edward Manton, John Finnie and Colin Smyth. Those against this amendment: Emma Harper, Richard Lyle, Angus MacDonald, Stewart Stevenson, Maureen Watt and Mike Rumbles. There are 5 votes for this amendment and there are 6 votes against. Therefore, Amendment 12 is not agreed. Now, sorry.
13.
Sorry?
Colin at 13.
I haven't got a 13.
I got mixed up.
Okay, sorry. To move or not move? Sorry?
Sorry, Convener, we lost you.
Okay, sorry. I therefore calling Amendment 13 in the name of John Finnie, already debated with Amendment 2. John Finnie, would you like to move this or not move this? John?
Not moved, thank you, Convener.
Thank you. But Mr. Lyle wants to move it again. My question is then Amendment 13 in the name of John Finnie, but moved by Mr. Lyle. Are we agreed? Oh, but we're not agreed. So therefore we'll go to a vote on this matter. Those in favour of Amendment 13, please press Y now. Those against the amendment, please press N now. And those who wish to abstain, please press A now. So the results on Amendment 13 are as follows. Peter Chapman, Rachel Hamilton, Edward Manton, John Finnie and Colin Smyth voted for the amendment. And Emma Harper, Richard Lyle, Angus MacDonald, Stewart Stevenson, Maureen Watt and Mike Rumbles voted against it. There therefore are 5 votes for the amendment and 6 votes against the amendment. And therefore the amendment is not agreed. The question, sorry. Yeah, the question is that Section 6 be agreed. Are we all agreed? We are agreed. And the question is that section 7 be agreed. Are we all agreed? We are agreed. Now, at that stage, I am briefly going to pause the committee for 5 minutes. 5 minutes. So I suspend the meeting for 5 minutes. Thank you. Okay, thank you very much. I, at the moment, don't have any pictures. I can't see anyone. Broadcasting, can you help before we go into this meeting, please? Thank you. I now have pictures. Thank you very much. I now reconvene this meeting. I would like to say at this stage to committee members the discussion and of this bill is taking slightly longer than I had perhaps anticipated, and I know we need to continue to debate this fully to allow the legislation to be properly scrutinised. But if we are getting to the stage close to 12 o'clock where I do not think we are going to finish, I will suspend the meeting and we will reconvene a meeting next week, which may have to be particularly early after before the meeting that we have on Wednesday. I now call Amendment 27 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary, grouped with Amendment 30. Cabinet Secretary, can I ask you to move Amendment 27 and speak to both amendments in the group?
Yes, I move Amendment 27 and speak to both amendments. Amendment 30 is the key one. It replaces Section 9 so that products and sectors that marketing standards can be set for is the same as in the UK Agricultural Bill. The first mentioned item is milk and milk products, and as we've heard already from Emma Harper in campaigning for dairy farming in Scotland, something that she's rightly pursued this morning, convener earlier, it's very important that we get these things absolutely right. Now, rather than just have a high-level description of a sector, for example, in Section 9, beef and veal, with all the detail left to regulations, the new version now provides fuller detail of the products covered on the face of the bill by reference to the European regulations under which the current marketing standards are set. Convener, I'm very conscious of the time here. I don't believe these are contentious provisions. I think that they are designed to be helpful and improve the law and indeed act upon the wishes of Parliament. So let me just guillotine myself and finish there.
Thank you very much, Cabinet Secretary. Does anyone wish to speak on Amendment 27? No one wishes to speak on the Amendment 27. So, Cabinet Secretary, can I ask you if you want to say anything further to wind up?
No, I don't need to wind up.
Thank you very much, Cabinet Secretary. The question, therefore, is Amendment 27 be agreed. Are we all agreed? No one's disagreed, so therefore we are agreed to Amendment 27. I therefore call Amendment 14 in the name of John Finnie, already debated with Amendment 1. I remind members at this stage that if Amendment 14 is agreed to, I cannot call Amendment 28 the preemption. John Finnie, to move or not move. Mr. Finnie.
Having regard to the Cabinet Secretary's comments earlier, it's not my intention to press this. I await with interest to see if any of the Cabinet Secretary's colleagues intend to press it on my behalf, of course.
Thank you. So we are on Amendment 14. It has not been moved. No one else wishes to move it. So I therefore call Amendment 28 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary, already debated with Amendment 1. Cabinet Secretary, can I ask you to formally move it, please?
Formally moved.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. The question there. The question, therefore, is that Amendment 28 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We are agreed. I therefore call Amendment 15 in the name of John Finnie, already debated with Amendment 2. I remind members that if Amendment 15 is agreed to, I cannot call Amendment 29 the preemption. John Finnie, can I ask you to move or not move Amendment 15, please? Sorry, I didn't hear that, John. I don't think you've been unmuted. I think I not moved. I may have got that wrong. John, you should be live.
Okay. Thank you, Convener. You're correct. Not pressing that.
Okay, so that is Amendment 15 is not being pressed, not being moved. So therefore, I therefore call Amendment 29 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary, already debated with Amendment 1. Cabinet Secretary, can I ask you to move this formally, please? Cabinet Secretary.
Yes, it's formally moved.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. The question is that Amendment 29 be agreed. Are we all agreed? We are agreed. The question, therefore, now at this stage is that Section 8 be agreed. Are we all agreed? We are agreed. Therefore, I call Amendment 30 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary, already debated with Amendment 27. Cabinet Secretary, can I ask you to move this formally, please?
Formally moved. Formally moved.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. The question, therefore, is that Amendment 30 be agreed. Are we all agreed? We are agreed. Therefore, the question is that Section 9 be agreed. Are we all agreed? We are agreed. I therefore call Amendment 16 in the name of John Finnie, already debated with Amendment 1. John Finnie, can I ask you if you want to move it or not move it, please? John.
Not moved. Thank you, Convener.
Okay, so Amendment 16 has not been moved. I therefore want to call Amendment 17 in the name of John Finnie, already debated with Amendment 2. John Finnie, to move or not move?
Not moved, Convener. Thank you. Not moved, Convener. Thank you.
Thank you, John. I've got that. John, Amendment 17 has not been moved. Therefore, the question is that Section 10 be agreed. Are we all agreed? We are agreed. The question is that Section 11 and the schedule be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We are agreed. Therefore, I call Amendment 18 in the name of Colin Smyth, already debated with Amendment 2. Colin Smyth, to move or not move?
Not moved, Convener.
Okay.
If 18 is not moved, I can't move 18A. You can't move that. So just you see you can't move, but that's been not moved, you cannot move.
Okay. As amendment, yes. Sorry, Rachel. I'm just going to say, as Amendment 18 has not been moved, I cannot move Amendment 18A unless 18 has been moved by somebody, and it hasn't been moved yet. So I'm afraid 18A is not moved. Therefore, I have to move to Amendment 24 in the name of John Finnie, already debated with Amendment 36. John Finnie, move or not move? John.
Not moved. Thank you, Convener.
I say Amendment 24 has not been moved, but I think Maureen Watt may wish to move this amendment. Maureen.
Yes, please, Convener. I think it's quite important that we record our votes on this amendment.
Okay, thank you, Maureen. So therefore, Amendment 24 in the name of John Finnie, are we moved by Maureen Watt? Are we all agreed? Or we're not agreed? Therefore, we will move to a division on Amendment 24. Those in favour, please press Y now. Those against, please press N now. Okay, and those who wish to abstain, please press A now. Therefore, on Amendment 24, those in favour are John Finnie and Colin Smyth. Those against are Emma Harper, Richard Lyle, Angus MacDonald, Stewart Stevenson, Maureen Watt, Peter Chapman, Rachel Hamilton, Edward Mountain and Mike Rumbles. There are 2 votes for the amendment. There are 9 votes against, and therefore it is disagreed. I'm therefore going to call Amendment 25 in the name of Rachel Hamilton, grouped with Amendment 39. Rachel Hamilton to move Amendment 25 and speak to both amendments in the group. Rachel.
Thank you, Convener. I move Amendment 25 in my name. And first and foremost, we know that the internal single market of the United Kingdom is extremely important to Scottish agriculture. Scottish exports to the rest of the UK increased in 2018 by 1.2 billion to 51.2 billion. As a result, the rest of the UK continues to be Scotland's largest market for exports, accounting for 3 times the value of the exports to the EU. In the Stage 1 REC Committee report, the committee highlighted that the emphasis placed by industry stakeholders on the importance of the rest of the UK as a marketplace for Scottish agricultural products. We need to maintain alignment in marketing standards across the UK internal market in order to avoid barriers to the movement and sale of these products post-Brexit. In my amendment, I wanted to ensure that standards were kept aligned, not to risk damaging the internal UK market. With regards to the other amendments in this group, Amendment 39 by Colin Smyth, I do not believe that we should continue to align with the EU so closely, given the importance of the UK internal single market as discussed.
Thank you, Rachel. I therefore now will call on Colin Smyth to speak to his Amendment 39 and any other amendments in the group. Colin.
Thank you very much, Convener. Amendment 39 in my name calls for changes to be made under this bill to be consistent with achieving dynamic alignment on EU regulatory standards, specifically those related to environmental standards, animal health and welfare, food safety and the sustainable management of natural resources. Agriculture is one of the areas where regulatory alignment with the EU is most important, and I think it's worth exploring whether this bill could be an opportunity to enshrine this principle of legislation in light of delays to the continuity bill. My amendment as drafted would only apply to secondary legislation made under this bill. This would ensure that standards are maintained during this transition period without putting something general and permanent legislation that could end up conflicting with or duplicating the general provisions in the continuity bill. However, I'm very much open to discussing the issue further and considering alternative approaches to this general principle. Often probing amendments are used in bills. The Cabinet Secretary is aware of my views on this issue. And my aim today is to have a debate and discussion on this particular principle, although I do appreciate that the conduct so far in some other amendments means that may be difficult. Amendment 25 by Rachel Hamilton also raises an important point on the need for regulatory alignment with the rest of the UK on certain issues. Internal UK markets are worth 3 times more than the EU single market, and it's very much in the interest of Scottish agriculture to ensure that we have common frameworks across the UK where appropriate. The amendment applies to food promotion schemes, marketing standards and carcass classification, all of which appear to be areas where some alignment would be very helpful. I'm not necessarily convinced of the exact wording of Rachel Hamilton's amendment, and indeed I recognise that there's likely a conflict between that amendment and my own. However, I believe the point raised by this amendment, similar to the points raised by my amendment, are important ones and one that needs to be addressed, if not in legislation, then I hope at the very least through clarification from the Cabinet Secretary, and we can have that grown-up debate. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you very much, Colin. I have 2 members who have indicated they wish to speak at this stage. So firstly will be Richard Lyle, then followed by Emma Harper. Richard Lyle. Richard.
Thank you, Convener. Rachel Hamilton's amendment feels like a typical Tory counter-move to give away Scotland's hard-fought powers, when the UK government is currently wriggling its way out of committing to maintaining high animal welfare, food safety and environmental standards. I'd be very concerned if we agreed today to commit to whatever standards they come up with in the future. Surely we should maintain the right to make a decision on a case-by-case basis on the best meets Scotland's interests rather than what suits the Tories. I may have some sympathy with Colin Smyth's Amendment 39. This is, after all, the Scottish Government and the Scottish Parliament's agreed position to seek and keep pace with EU standards. even after we've left the EU. So I'd be keen to hear what the Cabinet Secretary has to say on this. Is this the best way to bring such a commitment into domestic legislation? Thank you, Convener.
Thank you, Mr. Lyle. And we're now going to move to Emma Harper. Emma.
Thank you, Convener. I would just like to, I guess, echo Richard Lyle's points. I'm keen that given the recent voting in the UK government, which might actually affect the standards of produce coming into this country, I'm really keen that the Scottish Parliament keeps whatever ability and powers that we have to maintain the best welfare and the best standards that we can apply. I think that we need to make sure that the powers remain in the Scottish Parliament to control our food standards.
Thank you, Emma. No other members indicated they wish to speak. So, Cabinet Secretary, I think you may have a few words.
Convener, thank you. I want to make it clear that this government is committed to doing the very best for Scotland's rural economy, and I'd want to avoid any marketing standard changes that would cause problems for Scottish businesses trading with the rest of the UK and beyond. Unfortunately, that test is not met by Amendment 25. It refers to UK standards when these are not actually provided for in the UK Agricultural Bill. Rather, it sets up three separate regimes of marketing standards and carcass classification within the rest of the UK, one for England, one for Wales and one for Northern Ireland. And this bill completes the picture by establishing a similar regime for Scotland. Now, by passing Amendment 25, we would in fact end up with Scottish powers that differ from those elsewhere in the UK. That would make it harder to bring in comparable rules to those of the other administrations where that is the right thing to do. And crucially, the amendment has the effect that ministers will not be free to set standards that work for Scotland. I think this is the argument we've heard from Mr. Lyle and Ms. Harper. They will have to match an equivalent standard set elsewhere in the UK, even if that standard is a poor fit for the needs of our farmers and consumers, or worse, lower standards. So every other administration in the UK will have freedom to act. It's only Scotland that will be restricted, despite this being a devolved matter. So, in short, Amendment 25, in my view, Convener, unhelpfully cuts across the devolution settlement, and I can't support it. Turning to Colin Smyth's amendment, I just don't think his amendment is needed in this bill. I have some sympathy with some of the arguments he put forward, but there are two reasons primarily. First of all, Scottish ministers are already and rightly bound by key legislation on environment, for example, the climate change emission reduction targets, the Nature Conservation Act, the Animal Health and Welfare Scotland legislation. So these statutes already commit us to high standards, and obviously this bill doesn't change that. Secondly, as I indicated at stage one, the Scottish Government is committed to introducing a continuity bill, Convener, that will provide the ability to align Scots law with EU law in areas of devolved competence. And I anticipate that the matters covered in subsection 2 will be very carefully considered for that purpose, including Amendment 39 in this bill has the potential to lead to the undesirable scenario where we have different and possibly conflicting statutory measures and different degrees of alignment applying to the same matters. So I put forward that argument in the hope that Mr. Smyth agrees that we'd want to avoid this situation, but on the basis that, as he indicated, I'm sure that we can work together across this Parliament in order to seek to achieve the aims that he set out and I share. Thank you.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. I'm going to ask Rachel Hamilton to wind up and press or withdraw her amendment, please. Rachel.
Thank you, Convener. I accept the Cabinet Secretary's comments about Schedule 5 and 6, giving Northern Irish and Welsh ministers the powers over carcass classification and market standards. However, I don't believe my amendment affects the importance indeed of the devolution settlement, and indeed puts a significant emphasis on how important the single market is to Scottish farmers. So I will be pressing my amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. Therefore, we're at the stage where the question is that Amendment 25 be agreed. Are we all agreed? No, we're not agreed. Therefore, we'll go to a vote on Amendment 25. Those in favour, please press Y now. And those against, please press N now. Okay, and anyone who wishes to abstain. So I am missing one vote, which is Peter Chapman's vote, and as I said at the outset, I will do everything in my power during this committee meeting to record your vote. So, Peter, can you tell me how you wish to vote, please? Peter? No, your mic is muted. Wait, please, Peter. Don't touch it. Peter, now speak, please.
Yeah, I wish to record support for that amendment. A yes.
Thank you. That's a Y for Amendment 25. Thank you, Peter. Thank you. So the votes for Amendment 25 are as follows. Those in favour, Peter Chapman, Rachel Hamilton and Edward Mountain. Those against, Emma Harper, Richard Lyle, Angus MacDonald, Stewart Stevenson, Maureen Watt, John Finnie, Mike Rumbles and Colin Smyth. There are 3 votes for. There are 8 votes against. There are no abstentions, so Amendment 25 is not agreed. So therefore I call Amendment 39 in the name of Colin Smyth, already debated with Amendment 28. Colin Smyth, would you like to move or not move?
Not moved, Convener.
Not moved. Oh, but Mr. Lyle, I think, wants to move it. Mr. Lyle, do you want to move Amendment 39?
You know me so well, Convener. Yes, I do want to press.
Good, and I will refrain from commenting on that. Therefore, Amendment 39 in the name of Colin Smyth, moved by Mr. Lyle. Those in favour, please press Y now. Thank you. And those against, please press no, N now.
Abstentions, please. Sorry.
What?
Could you ask for abstentions?
And any abstentions, please? Thank you. And taking a DN as not don't know but no, on that basis, those in favour are John Finnie and Colin Smyth. And those against are Emma Harper, Richard Lyle, Angus MacDonald, Stewart Stevenson, Maureen Watt, Peter Chapman, Rachel Hamilton, Edward Mountain and Mike Rumbles. There are 2 votes for, there are 9 votes against. Therefore, Amendment 39 is not agreed. Therefore, call Amendment 19 in the name of John Finnie, already debated with Amendment 2. John, would you like to move this amendment or not move it? John?
Not moved. Thank you, Convener.
Not moved. Okay. Don't know people as well as I thought I did. Therefore, Amendment 19 is not moved. Therefore, I call Amendment 20 in the name of Colin Smyth, already debated with Amendment 2. Colin Smyth, would you like to move this amendment or not move it? Colin?
I think the principle of agricultural activity being consulted on is an important one, so I will move the amendment.
Thank you, and therefore I call now Amendment 20A in the name of Rachel Hamilton. Sorry, I'm just confused.
Somebody did Colin move.
Yes, Colin did move his. You did move your amendment, didn't you, Colin? Sorry. Yes. Thank you. And therefore, I'm going to call Amendment 20A in the name of Rachel Hamilton, already debated with Amendment 2. Rachel Hamilton, to move or not move Amendment 20.
Convener, point order. 20.
There are,
20,
there are no points of order on committee, Mr. Lyle, but if you would like to... No, Mr. Lyle, please. If you'd like to raise an issue, I will come back to you.
Amendment 20, I have recorded. I want to vote on it.
Well, Mr. Lyle, if you were following the proceedings, you'd know we were having a vote on it. But before we vote on Amendment 20, we have to vote on Amendment 20A. Once I have disposed of Amendment 20A, I will come back to Amendment 20. So just all noted, keep smiling. We're getting to the end, and have some trust in me. And I come back to Rachel Hamilton now and ask you, Rachel Hamilton, do you wish to move Amendment 20A? Move or not move, Rachel?
Not moved.
Not moved.
Not moved.
Thank you. Therefore, no one else wants to move it. Therefore, I'm going back to Amendment 20. Colin, you have pressed this amendment, and therefore the question is, are we all agreed on Amendment 20? Mr. Lyle, now's your perfect opportunity.
No. Vote again. Let's have a vote.
So we don't agree. We don't agree. Thank you.
I don't agree.
Thank you. We will therefore come to a division. Those in favour, please push Y now. Thank you. Those against, press no now. N. Thank you. And anyone who wishes to abstain, please press A now. Thank you. So on Amendment 20, the votes are as follows. Those in favour of Amendment 20, Peter Chapman, Rachel Hamilton, Edward Mountain, John Finnie and Colin Smyth. Those against are Emma Harper, Richard Lyle, Angus MacDonald, Stewart Stevenson, Maureen Watt and Mike Rumbles. There are therefore 5 votes for Amendment 20. There are 6 votes against it and no abstentions. Therefore, Amendment 20 is not agreed. The question is that Section 12 be agreed. Are we all agreed? We are all agreed. Therefore, the question is Sections 13, 14 and 15 be agreed. Are we all agreed? We are agreed. Therefore, I'm now going to call the Amendment 21 in the name of John Finnie, grouped with Amendments 40 and 41. John Finnie, can I please ask you to move Amendment 21 and speak to all the amendments in the group, please? John.
Thank you, Convener. I'll be extremely brief. I formally move Amendment 21. This is in the section about the purpose for which information may be required or processed, and it's an extensive list that exists there at the moment, including, for instance, increased productivity. And my proposal is that we add risks to animal or human health, which I think is a proportionate addition, and hopefully members will support. I'd also like to give strong support to my colleague, Dr. Colin Smyth's 40 and 41 on the issues of food. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, John. I'd now like to move to Colin Smyth to speak to Amendment 40 and the other amendments in the group. Colin.
Thank you very much, Convener. I lodged Amendments 40 and 41 in response to the decision by the Government to shelve the Good Food Nations Bill. While I recognise the decision not to go ahead with the bill may have been unavoidable due to a lack of parliamentary time, it's nonetheless disappointing for many people. I think, therefore, we have a duty to reflect on whether there are other appropriate legislative opportunities to take forward elements of that bill that are relevant to that legislation. A key part of the Agriculture Bill is data collection, and Amendment 40 in my name would allow data to be required and processed for the purpose of monitoring food security in Scotland. The last few months have shown what a huge challenge food security in Scotland is, and addressing it should be a key aim of the Good Food Nation programme. Monitoring food security can fortify the resilience of our food system by allowing the government to proactively identify and mitigate threats to our food security. It can also help to analyse and address the conditions that have given rise to high levels of food insecurity. This amendment would ensure that the necessary data can be collected to monitor this important issue. Similarly, Amendment 41 looks to ensure the data needed for any national food plan can also be collected. A proposed national food plan was a key element of the government's Good Food Nation Bill proposals, and this last few months have made it clearer than ever that we need a more strategic, joined-up approach to food policy. A national food plan is, of course, the government's own language. It doesn't refer to some central production diktat, but the need to work across departments on the full spectrum of issues related to food from farm to fork to waste. For example, a relevant issue in recent weeks is the importance of contingency planning during a national crisis. I think both of these amendments are relatively modest, but therefore useful additions to this bill, and both serve a practical purpose in supporting the development of food policy. However, I did lodge these amendments in part to encourage a discussion on the Good Food Nation programme more broadly, and I hope we can have that adult discussion today and in the weeks ahead as this bill passes through Parliament. I hope the Cabinet Secretary will use this opportunity to clarify what the government's plans are now that the bill has been shelved on Good Food Nation, particularly relating to a national food plan, and I hope he'll consider what other changes could be introduced through this bill to support that. Amendment 21 by John Finnie and supported by myself clarifies the risks for which information under sections 13 or 14 may be required or processed by specifying that it includes risks, animal or human health. I believe this is a useful addition which will make this provision clearer. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you. And there are a few members who wish to speak in this. So I'm going to go to Mike Rumbles first, followed by myself. Mike Rumbles.
Thank you, Convener. I fully support a Good Food Nation bill, and I've been very supportive of it for some considerable time, and I'm disappointed that that bill itself was so close to being published, but the Scottish Government felt it couldn't proceed with it. However, this bill that we're dealing with today is a technical bill. In my view, it is not the place to put any policy issues like this into it. We need a new bill, and I would urge the Scottish Government to introduce such a bill as soon as possible, but I don't think it's right for Colin Smyth's 40 and 41 to proceed on that basis, and I won't be supporting it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mike, for that. This is going to be my one contribution, I think, to the debate today, and I'm taking my convener's hat off to speak as a committee member. I have always supported a Good Food Nation bill, and I was bitterly disappointed that, having thought the committee was going to be able to consider it and we were going to be able to look at it, that things have panned out that we can't. I don't, probably like Mike Rumbles, believe that this is the perfect place to have mention to Good Food and Good Food Nation. However, it is the only chance I believe that we are going to get the opportunity to consider the Good Food Nation, and therefore I will be supporting members 40 and 41. And I would just like to say at this stage that I am particularly thankful for Colin Smyth finding the time to come to me and explaining those amendments, which I originally wasn't entirely happy with, so that I understood what they meant and what they were trying to achieve. So I speak in favour of Amendment 40 and 41. I'm not sure at this stage, Rachel Hamilton wants to come in, sorry. Rachel, I will bring you in and then we will go to the Cabinet Secretary.
Convener, it's just a brief point to say that I agree with the comments that have been made from Mike Rumbles and yourself. I think that the Good Food Bill should have had the opportunity to be enshrined in law. It's a popular thing to take forward, and I think that I agree in a way with Mike Rumbles that this is a clunky way to put what we all expected to take forward in the bill into this. However, we have no option because the Scottish Government decided to block it, and so we're left with no choice. And I think that we should give this amendment justice and take it forward to stage 3 to have a proper discussion about it.
Thank you, Rachel. No other member has indicated they wish to speak, so I'm going to move to the Cabinet Secretary. Sorry, Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you, Convener. First of all, can I thank John Finnie for speaking to his amendment. We've been able to have discussions prior to this, and in the light of that, I'm happy to accept Mr Finnie's amendment 21. I would also thank Mr Smith for explaining the purposes behind his amendments 40 and 41, much of which I agree. The last 3 months have illustrated, sadly, the fragility of global food supply chains and thus food security, and plainly it is necessary, therefore, to collect the relevant data. The committee gave consent to the UK-wide provisions on reporting food security through the Ag Bill in the UK because it does make sense for a UK-wide report to consider the effective working of UK and global supply chains. The Part 2 of our bill here enables Scottish ministers to collect information about the activities of those in or closely connected with agri-food supply chains and those who carry out other agricultural activities. And therefore, I would say in relevance to Mr Rumble's remarks that I do think that Amendment 40 does touch on an area which is within the scope of this bill, because this bill relates to information gathering and his amendment relates to a species of information with which we may wish to ingather. That said, my belief is that the definition of the information that we're already able to ingather is wide enough to cover this, but we will undertake to look further at this, Convener. If Mr Smith in exchange is willing today not to press his amendment, then I undertake to come back to the committee, and of course Mr Smith, prior to stage 3, after we've had a chance to look and see whether on the technical narrow point it is necessary to bring something else into this bill to enable something to be done with which we entirely agree. Turning to Amendment 41, I think Mr Rumbles is correct that this is trying to do something that the Good Food Nation Bill would have done. We are absolutely in favour of a Good Food Nation Bill, but because of parliamentary time and COVID, I'm afraid that the time available for that is just not there, and that is, I think, a statement of fact. The statement of policy that the bill would set out would cover food production and consumption issues relating, for example, to growing, harvesting, processing, marketing, sale, preparation and consumption of food and disposal of waste, and access to affordable, local, nutritious and culturally appropriate food and food in the public sector. So, despite the necessary postponement of the Good Food Nation Bill, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't set out a statement of policy on a non-statutory basis. So I agree with Mr Rumbles that this bill is not the place to deal with if you like, a substitute Good Food Nation Bill. But what I would undertake to do, again, if Mr Smith would agree not to press his amendment today, is to go away and look at how we can further set out, as a policy commitment, the statement of policy in respect of policy, as I've said. So I hope that members would accept my undertaking. Mr Smith will not feel the need to press his amendment a 41. If he does feel the need to press it, I would suggest that it be rejected. But I hope that Mr Smith would accept the undertaking and the desire we have, working with him and others in the committee, to find a way forward on this particular matter, but perhaps on a non-statutory basis, Convener. I hope I've explained that clearly. Thank you.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. Can I ask John Finnie, please, to wind up, please, and to press or withdraw your amendment. John.
Thank you, Convener. I'll simply press the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. We therefore will move. The question is that Amendment 21 be agreed. Are we all agreed? We are all agreed. Therefore, I'm going to call Amendment 40 in the name of Colin Smyth, already debated with Amendment 21. Colin Smyth, to move or not move? Colin.
Thank you very much indeed, Convener. I think in light of the Cabinet Secretary's very helpful comments at this stage, I'm not going to move the amendment, or indeed, if it's helpful, Amendment 41 in the hope that we'll have further discussions on this issue. I want to make clear this is not about imposing the Good Food Nations Bill into this bill. It is about looking at the current objectives of this bill and updating it to reflect some of the events that we've seen in recent months. And hopefully we can have that grown-up debate in the weeks ahead, and we won't see some of the antics earlier where people moving amendments when they are, of course, designed as a probing amendment, which this is. So I welcome Cabinet Secretary's comments and look forward to those discussions in the weeks ahead.
Okay, so thank you very much for Colin for that, and I'm going to have to deal with each amendment separately. So in relation to Amendment 40, you have, which had already been debated, you have decided not to move that. I'm just looking to see if anyone objects to that. No one objects to it. Therefore, in relation to Amendment 41 in your name, which again we've already debated, just to confirm, Colin, that you do not wish to move that amendment, Colin.
Not moved, Convener.
Okay, so Amendment 41 has not been moved. Okay, so my next question, therefore, is that Section 16 be agreed. Are we all agreed? We are agreed. So the question is that Sections 17, 18 and 19 be agreed. Are we all agreed? No, we are agreed. So I call Amendment 42 in the name of Colin Smyth, already debated with Amendment 7. Colin Smyth, move or not move, please?
Colin. It's been moved, Convener.
Sorry?
Moved.
I'm confused. You are moving that amendment. So the question is that are we all agreed to Amendment 42? No, we're not agreed. So therefore we will go to a division on this. Those in favour, please press Y now. Those against, please press no, N now. Yep. And if anyone wishes to abstain, please press A now. John Finnie's abstained. Thank you very much. So Amendment 42, those for the amendment are Peter Chapman, Rachel Hamilton, Edward Mountain and Colin Smyth. Those against it are Emma Harper, Richard Lyle, Angus MacDonald, Stewart Stevenson and Mike Rumbles. And John Finnie is abstained. Therefore, there are 4 votes for, 6 votes against, 1 abstention. Therefore, Amendment 42 is not agreed. Therefore, the question at this stage is Section 20 be agreed. Are we all agreed? We are agreed. Therefore, I'm going to call Amendment 31 in the name of Rachel Hamilton, grouped with Amendment 32. Rachel Hamilton to move Amendment 31 and speak to both amendments in the group, please. Rachel.
Thank you, Convener. From the start, I've been clear that this bill is about process and not policy. We believe that this mechanism will ensure that new policy is introduced after 2024, rather than allowing retained EU legislation to continue beyond then, with corrections being made through the negative procedure, which we don't think would benefit the agricultural sector in the long term. Farmers need clarity on policy direction, and my amendment will do this by forcing the government to report on its work. We share the concerns of many stakeholders, members who have spoken already in the debate and the relevant parliamentary committees, that it would not be proportionate for the Scottish Government to have the potentially broad power conferred by Section 2 of the bill on an indefinite basis. Amendment 31 in my name seeks to ensure that Scottish ministers update and report to Parliament on their progress on developing a policy-focused agricultural bill, which will outline the future direction of Scottish agriculture. I know that various task forces and policy work has been done to date, but it is the case that this must be incorporated into a new bill. It cannot be added onto this current bill. That would be inappropriate. We have continued as a party to press the Scottish Government for further clarity on its policy proposals for future farming support. Amendment 32 also in my name, ensures that Scottish ministers must, no later than the 31st of March 2026, bring forward proposals for legislation to implement their policy for agricultural support. This bill cannot simply continue to run on. Therefore, a new standalone bill must replace it no later than March 2026. This would take the form of a new Scottish agricultural bill. The bill would outline the future farm payments model, detail various efficiency environmental schemes, as well as ensure that there is support for pilot schemes and new entrants. I move the amendment 31 and 32 in the name, Convener.
Okay, thank you. So far I have one member who wishes to speak in relation to this, and that's the Deputy Convener, Maureen Watt. Maureen. No, you're still muted. Just hang on. Now you're live. Sorry. Slow getting your microphone on. You don't want to miss a word.
Okay, thank you, Convener. It seems to me from what Rachel Hamilton said that she seems very keen on bolting down everything in statute, but I thought we'd agreed in our Stage 1 report not to require such a statutory undertaking. So maybe the Cabinet Secretary could answer whether we're only asking the Government to provide a progress report on legislation to replace the current cap by 2024. Would it then be the case that we're not able to design, develop and implement any new support system in time to actually deliver any new policy? And I wouldn't have thought we wanted to risk that happening. So I look forward to what the Cabinet Secretary has to say.
Thank you very much, Maureen, and no one else asked to speak, so we can hear what the Cabinet Secretary wants to hear. Cabinet Secretary.
Yes, thank you, Convener. During Stage 1 evidence sessions with both committees, I set out how I already update Parliament regularly on the steps being taken to develop future policy on farming and food production. I also made it absolutely clear that I'm happy to continue to do so and will continue to do so. Both committees accepted my explanation, and indeed this is reflected in the Stage 1 report, which stated, and I quote, "As a result of reassurances provided by the Scottish Government that it intends to report regularly to the Parliament as regards the bill's implementation, the committee is satisfied there is no need for a statutory requirement on periodic reporting to Parliament to be included in the bill." So I, with respect, don't consider that this commitment needs to be made a statutory duty, and indeed in subsection 3B, I would rather hope the next Scottish Government will have made significantly faster progress than Rachel Hamilton anticipates in making substantive policy legislation. So I do understand the intention behind this amendment, but I would suggest that it's not necessary, and the committee previously determined that, Convener, as did the DPLC. In relation to Amendment 32, I do think this has been somewhat superseded by the fact that we've now agreed that the sunset clause will apply in May 26. So I would contend that if you look at the precise wording of Amendment 32, it's simply no longer necessary because Parliament will be obliged to legislate, I think, in May of that year as opposed to the 31st of March that year. So, you know, by definition, I think that Amendment 32 is no longer relevant, although I do respect and understand why the member has brought the amendment here. So I would respectfully ask that she now accepts that it's not necessary to press this amendment, but if so, I would encourage the committee to reject it. I think I'll just leave it there, Convener. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cabinet Secretary. And I'm going to ask Rachel Hamilton to wind up, please, and press or withdraw your Amendment 31, please, Rachel.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for his generous comments. I have no further comments on this because I think that I made my points previously. However, I would like to press both amendments. Did you say Amendment 31?
Yes, you'll get a chance to press Amendment 32 in a moment, but having pressed Amendment 31, we now need to go to a vote on that. The question is that Amendment 31 be agreed, but we're not agreed, so therefore we're going to go to a vote on Amendment 31. Those in favour, please press Y now. And those against, please press N now. And anyone who wishes to abstain, please press A now. Thank you. Therefore, the votes on Amendment 1 are as follows. Those are in favour: Peter Chapman, Rachel Hamilton, Edward Mountain and Colin Smyth. Those against: Emma Harper, Richard Lyle, Angus MacDonald, Stewart Stevenson, Maureen Watt, John Finnie and Mike Rumbles. No one abstained. There were 4 votes for. There were 7 votes against. And therefore, Amendment 31 is not agreed. I therefore call Amendment 32 in the name of Rachel Hamilton, already debated with Amendment 31. Rachel Hamilton, to move or not move?
Move.
You have moved Amendment 31. So the question is that Amendment, sorry, yes, 32, sorry. The question is that Amendment 32 be agreed. Are we all agreed, but we're not agreed? So therefore, we're going to go to a vote. Those in favour, please press Y now on Amendment 32. Those against, please press N now. And those who wish to abstain, please press A now. So on Amendment 32, the votes are as follows. Peter Chapman, Rachel Hamilton, Edward Mountain and Colin Smyth voted for the amendment. And Emma Harper, Richard Lyle, Angus MacDonald, Stewart Stevenson, Maureen Watt, John Finnie and Mike Rumbles voted against the amendment. Therefore, no one abstained, so there were 4 votes for the amendment, 7 votes against, and therefore the amendment was not agreed. I therefore question now is that Section 21 be agreed. Are we all agreed? We are agreed. I therefore call Amendment 33 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary grouped with Amendment 34 and 35. Cabinet Secretary, can I ask you to move Amendment 33 and speak to all amendments in the group? Cabinet Secretary.
Yes, thank you, Convener. My battery in my iPad is just about to go flat, so I just say that in case the parliamentary television staff may need to shift me to where Mr Burgess is sitting as an expedient, but hopefully we can get through this swiftly. Convener, this group concerns technical amendments that seek to reflect the requirements of the withdrawal agreement agreed during the preparation of this bill, but the full implications of which are still unfolding. The powers in Part 1 can only be used to modify former EU law after it's rolled into the domestic law. Subsection 1 therefore provides that a reference to any EU regulation is to be read as a reference to the regulation as it forms part of domestic law by virtue of Section 3 of the European Withdrawal Act 2018, that is, as retained EU law. However, Article 137(1) of the withdrawal agreement provided for the rollover of direct payment rules for the CAP 220 claim year on 31st January 2020. As a result, there will now be at least 2 types of retained EU CAP law. Pillar 1, rules already rolled over by the Direct Payments to Farmers Legislative Continuity Act 2020, and other rules as prospectively rolled over by the European Union Withdrawal Act 2018. Section 22, as currently drafted, only covers the European Union Withdrawal Act 18 and so needs to be amended so that it also covers the Direct Payments to Farmers Legislative Continuity Act 2020. The terms of the withdrawal agreement and the urgent need to roll over direct payment rules at the end of January 2020 further show the need to be able to respond flexibly to unexpected events. And of course, some uncertainty does remain. Convener, the rest of the remarks here, I think I don't really need to detain the committee. I've set out the technical reason for the amendment, and I hope that that will suffice to satisfy members on this somewhat abstruse legal matter. Thank you.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary, and it appears that you have satisfied the other committee members because no one wishes to speak. So I could come straight back to you, Cabinet Secretary, and ask if you'd like to wind up.
I'm just saying, Convener, it's the way I tell them. And I don't wish to add up, to sum up, thanks.
There's no answer to that. So the question is, Amendment 33 be agreed. Are we all agreed? We are agreed. Therefore, I call Amendment 34 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary, already debated with Amendment 33. Cabinet Secretary, could I ask you to move it formally, please?
Formally moved. Formally moved.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. The question is, Amendment 34 be agreed. Are we all agreed? We are agreed. Therefore, can I call Amendment 35 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary, already debated with Amendment 33? Cabinet Secretary, can I ask you to move that formally, please?
Formally moved. Formally moved.
Thank you. Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. So the question is that Amendment 35 be agreed. Are we all agreed? We are agreed. So the next question is that Section 22 be agreed. Are we all agreed? We are agreed. So I call Amendment 22 in the name of Mike Rumbles, already debated with Amendment 7. Mike Rumbles, to move or not move? Mike.
Moved. Moved.
Okay, the question is that, yep, I got it the first time, Mr. Rumbles. Thank you. The question is that Amendment 22 be agreed. Are we all agreed? We are agreed. Therefore, the question that we have now is that Section 23 be agreed. Are we all agreed? We are agreed. Therefore, I call Amendment 26 in the name of John Finnie, already debated with Amendment 7. John Finnie, would you like to move this amendment or not move it? John Finnie. John.
Not moved, thank you, Convener.
Not moved. Oh, but Mr. Lyle wants to come in here. Mr. Lyle, you'd like to say something?
Move, Convener.
Oh, you would like to move Amendment 26 in the name that is in the name of John Finnie. So the question is,
yes, Convener.
26 be agreed. Are we all agreed? Oh, but we're not agreed. No, we're not agreed. So therefore, we'll go to a division on Amendment 26. The question is, those in favour of the amendment, please press Y now. Thank you. Those against the amendment, please press an N now. Thank you. And those who wish to abstain, please push the A now. Thank you. So the voting for Amendment 26 is as follows. Peter Chapman, Rachel Hamilton, Edward Manns and John Finnie and Colin Smyth voted for the amendment. Emma Harper, Richard Lyle, Angus MacDonald, Stewart Stevenson, Maureen Watt and Mike Rumbles voted against it. There are 5 votes for, there are 6 votes against, there are no abstentions. Therefore, the amendment is not agreed. The question is, therefore, at this stage, is Section 24 agreed? Are we all agreed? We are agreed. The question is that a long title be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We are agreed. That therefore ends stage 2 consideration of the bill, and the bill as amended at stage 2 will be available later on this week. I'd like to thank everyone for taking part in today's meeting. It seems to have worked and the voting seems to have been accurately recorded. So thank you very much for your time and for all those people behind the scenes who've made this possible. The Parliament has not yet determined when stage 3 will take place, but members can now lodge stage 3 amendments. And that concludes today's committee business. Thank you very much, everyone.